I expected a dry procedural hearing to close the book on my grandfather's passing. Instead, my sister strode in wearing a coat worth more than my car. Flanked by our parents who looked like they had rehearsed their solemn nods all morning. When the judge asked if I objected, I simply asked him to wait. Then the doors swung open, and a man in a black suit entered carrying a single envelope that changed the air pressure in the room. My name is Avery Harper, and as I sat alone at the defendant's table in the Stonebrook County Probate Court, I realized I was the only person in the room who was actually grieving. The air in the courtroom was stale, recycled through vents that rattled with a low mechanical hum, smelling faintly of floor wax and old paper. It was a smell I had grown used to over the last 48 hours, but for my sister, Sloane, it was clearly an assault on her senses. She sat at the plaintiff's table to my right, her posture rigid, her spine not even grazing the back of the wooden chair. She was wearing a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than my entire tuition at community college. Draped over her shoulders like a cape, a style choice that screamed she did not plan to be here long enough to actually put her arms through the sleeves. Behind her sat our parents, Victor and Janine. They were arranged like decorative pillows on a sofa, perfectly positioned to support Sloane's narrative. My mother was wearing black, but it was a fashionable black, a silk blouse that caught the fluorescent light, not the dull cotton of mourning. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw set in that familiar line of disappointment I had memorized since I was 6 years old. They looked like a phalanx, a unified front, and I was the enemy combatant on the other side of the aisle, armed with nothing but a frantic pulse and a secret that was currently burning a hole in my stomach. The bailiff had called the docket number, case 4927, and Sloane had stood up before the clerk had even finished reading the name of the deceased. Walter Hargrove, my grandfather. Hearing his name spoken aloud in this sterile administrative tone made my chest ache. To them, he was an estate. To the court, he was a file number. To me, he was the man who had taught me how to grow tomatoes and who had held my hand while he took his last breath just 5 days ago. A breath neither of my parents had witnessed. A breath Sloane had been too busy to catch because she was at a fundraiser in D.C. "Your Honor," Sloane's lawyer began. He was a man named Sterling, smooth-faced and silver-haired, possessing a voice that sounded like it had been lubricated with expensive scotch. "We are moving for an expedited summary judgment regarding the transfer of assets. The will is straightforward. Ms. Sloane Harper is the primary executor named in the document dated 2019. We see no reason for the delay caused by the respondent." He gestured vaguely in my direction, not even bothering to look at me. I was an obstruction, a traffic cone in the middle of their highway to the bank. Judge Holloway peered over his reading glasses. He looked tired. He had a stack of files on his desk that was at least 8 inches high, and it was barely 10 o'clock in the morning. He did not want drama. He wanted efficient processing of death. "I have read the motion," the judge said, his voice gravelly. He turned his gaze toward me. "Ms. Harper, you are representing yourself today?" I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead shot. I smoothed the front of my blazer, a thrift store find that I had ironed 3 times this morning. "Yes, Your Honor. Do you have an objection to the petitioner's motion to execute the will as presented?" The room went silent. This was the moment Sloane had been waiting for. I could feel her eyes on the side of my face, hot and expectant. She wanted me to cry. She wanted me to launch into a hysterical diatribe about how unfair it was, about how I had been the one changing Grandpa's bed sheets and managing his oxygen tank while she was posting photos of her brunches on social media. She wanted a scene because a scene would prove that I was unstable. It would prove that I was emotional, irrational, and unfit to handle anything more complex than a grocery list. If I cried, they won. If I shouted, they won. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of furniture polish. "I do object, Your Honor," I said. My voice did not shake. Sloane let out a sharp, audible exhale, a sound of theatrical exasperation. Sterling, her lawyer, shook his head with a pitying smile, as if I were a toddler refusing to eat my peas. "On what grounds?" Judge Holloway asked. He flipped a page in the file. "The will from 2019 seems valid. It is notarized. It leaves the bulk of the estate to the family trust. With your sister as executor, are you contesting the signature?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "Are you contesting the mental capacity of the deceased at the time of signing?" "No, Your Honor." Sterling stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, this is exactly what we anticipated. Ms. Avery Harper has a history of difficulties. She has been living rent-free in the deceased's home for 2 years. She is simply trying to prolong her stay because she has nowhere else to go. This objection is frivolous. It is a stalling tactic from a young woman who lacks the financial literacy to understand that the probate process is not a negotiation." He used the words financial literacy like a weapon. It was a dog whistle for the family narrative. Avery the artist, Avery the dreamer, Avery the failure. Sloane was the success story, the one who understood the language of money. I was just the help. I looked at my watch. It was 10:04. He said he would be here by 10:05. "I am not stalling, Your Honor," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the judge. "I am asking the court for a momentary recess, or simply to wait." "Wait?" The judge frowned. "For what? This is a court of law, Ms. Harper, not a bus stop." "For the proper party to arrive," I said. "The proper party?" Sterling laughed. A short barking sound. "Every interested party is in this room, Your Honor. The parents, the sister, the named executor. Unless Ms. Harper plans to summon a spirit medium, we are wasting the court's time." Behind me, I heard the rustle of fabric. My father leaned forward. The wood of the gallery rail creaked under his weight. I could feel his breath near my neck, even from a distance. "Avery," he hissed. It was a whisper, but in the acoustic quiet of the courtroom, it carried like a shout. "Sit down. You are making a fool of yourself. God, you always find a way to embarrass this family." The words landed exactly where he intended them to, right in the center of my chest, reopening wounds that had never really healed. It was the same tone he had used when I dropped out of business school to study design, the same tone he used when I moved in with Grandpa because no one else would help him. Embarrassment. To Victor Harper. Reputation was currency, and I was a bad investment. My mother said nothing, which was her signature move. Her silence was the mortar that held my father's bricks together. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white. I did not turn around. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing the tears that were pricking the corners of my eyes. "Ms. Harper," Judge Holloway said, his patience visibly thinning. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I am going to give you 1 minute to provide a legal basis for your objection, or I am going to rule in favor of the plaintiff and grant the immediate transfer of control to your sister. I have 18 other cases on the docket today. I do not have time for family squabbles." "It is not a squabble, Your Honor," I said. I checked my watch again. The second hand swept past the 12. 10:05. "Then what is it?" the judge snapped. Sloane leaned over to her lawyer and whispered something loud enough for me to hear. "She's waiting for a settlement offer. She thinks if she drags this out, I'll cut her a check to make her go away." "I don't want your money, Sloane," I said, breaking protocol to speak to her directly. "Address the bench," Sterling barked at me. "Then give the bench a reason." Judge Holloway slammed his hand down on the file. "Last chance, Ms. Harper." The room felt incredibly small suddenly. The walls seemed to be leaning in. I could see the triumph on Sloane's face. She had already won in her mind. She was probably mentally redecorating Grandpa's house right now, imagining which walls to knock down to increase the resale value. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, the way one looks at a stray dog that has wandered onto a pristine lawn. I looked at the judge. "My objection is based on jurisdiction and standing. Your Honor, the document, Mr. Sterling is referencing, the will from 2019, is valid as a historical document, but it is irrelevant to the disposition of the assets, Sterling scoffed. Irrelevant? It is the last will and testament. It governs assets held in the decedent's name, I said, reciting the lines I had memorized, the lines that had terrified me when I first read them. But there are no assets in the decedent's name. The judge paused. Explain. The petitioner is asking for control of an empty shell, I said, my voice gaining strength. The house, the investment accounts, the savings, the patent residuals, everything was moved. The person who controls the inheritance is not sitting in this room. This is absurd, Sterling said, standing up again. We have the bank records from last month. We have the title deeds. This is a desperate fabrication. The records from last month are outdated, I said. Enough, the judge said. Ms. Harper, unless you have documentation to prove that the estate has been altered, I am ruling. I don't have the documentation, I admitted. Sloane let out a laugh of pure disbelief. She doesn't have it. Of course she doesn't, because it doesn't exist. Your Honor, please. I don't have it, I continued, because it is not my job to carry it. Judgment for the plaintiff, the judge began to say, reaching for his gavel. Ms. Harper, I am noting your objection for the record, but without evidence— Wait, I said. It came out louder than I intended. Just wait. I am done waiting, the judge boomed. And then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were pushed with a deliberate, heavy force that made the hinges groan. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. The air pressure in the room seemed to shift, a physical change that made everyone turn in their seats. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Sloane turned around, a look of annoyance on her face, expecting perhaps a lost tourist or a late clerk. My father twisted in his seat, ready to scold whoever was interrupting. But the figure standing in the doorway was neither a tourist nor a clerk. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It was tailored with a precision that made Sterling's expensive suit look off the rack. He wore a crisp white shirt and a black tie, and he carried a thick, leather briefcase in one hand and a single, sealed manila envelope in the other. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at my parents. He did not look at Sloane. He walked down the center aisle with a rhythmic, measured pace. Click, 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 the sound of his shoes echoing on the linoleum. He moved with the terrifying confidence of a man who knows he is the most dangerous thing in the room. The judge froze, his gavel hovering inches above the wood. The man walked past the bar, past Sloane's table, without even glancing at her, and stopped directly in front of the judge's bench. He placed the briefcase on the floor and laid the manila envelope on the judge's desk with a gentle, deliberate motion. Then, he turned to face the room. His eyes swept over everyone, Sloane, Sterling, my parents, before finally landing on me. He gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. He turned back to the judge. Apologies for the delay, Your Honor, the man said. His voice was deep, calm, and carried zero inflection. Traffic on the interstate was worse than anticipated. Who are you? Judge Holloway asked, looking from the man to the envelope. You cannot just barge into a closed hearing. I am not barging, Your Honor, the man said. I am responding to the docket call for the estate of Walter Hargrove. We are in the middle of a ruling, Sterling sputtered, stepping forward. Who is this man? Is he a witness? Ms. Harper did not disclose any witnesses list. The man in the black suit ignored Sterling completely. He pointed a gloved finger at the envelope. I believe, the man said, that the document inside will clarify why Ms. Harper objected and why the plaintiff's motion is not only invalid but legally impossible. The judge hesitated, then reached out and picked up the envelope. He broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper was the only noise in the room. Sloane stood up, her face losing its composure for the first time. This is ridiculous. Who are you? The man turned to her, He didn't smile. He didn't sneer. He just looked at her with a professional detachment that was colder than hatred. "My name is not important right now," he said. "What is important is that you are sitting in the wrong chair." The judge pulled a sheaf of documents from the envelope. He read the first page. His eyebrows shot up. He read the second page. He looked at Sloane, then at me, and then back at the man in the black suit. The color drained from the judge's face, not out of fear, but out of the sudden realization that his courtroom had just become a minefield. "Mr. Sterling?" the judge said, his voice dropping an octave. "Sit down." "But, Your Honor." "Sit down," the judge barked. He looked at the man in black. "This date, this is from 3 days before the death?" "Correct," the man said. "Executed, witnessed, and funded." "Funded?" Sloane whispered. "Funded into what?" The man in the black suit finally answered the question I had thrown into the silence moments ago. "The inheritance is not in probate, Ms. Harper," he said to Sloane, though he was looking at the judge. "It is in a trust, and I am the trustee." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a bomb counting down to 0. To understand the explosion that had just occurred in the courtroom, you have to understand the fuse. And the fuse had been lit exactly 8 months ago, not in a lawyer's office, but on the linoleum floor of a kitchen in Stonebrook. That was the day Walter Hargrove fell. It was not a dramatic fall. He did not tumble down a flight of stairs or collapse from a heart attack. He had simply turned too quickly to reach for the coffee pot. His slipper lost traction on a spill he hadn't seen, and gravity did the rest. When the paramedics called me, they said he was lucky. A hairline fracture in the hip, bruises that looked like ink spills on parchment paper, but his mind was intact. His independence, however, was shattered. I was the one who packed a bag. I was the one who put my freelance graphic design career on an indefinite pause. I moved into the guest room of his sprawling, silent house because the alternative was a facility, and Walter would have withered and died in a facility within a week. My family called it Avery playing nurse. I called it doing the right thing. For the first few weeks, the house was quiet. It was just the rhythmic chug of his oxygen concentrator and the sound of the evening news. But as soon as the doctors mentioned the word rehabilitation instead of recovery, the sharks began to circle. They did not circle with dorsal fins. They circled with bouquets of expensive flowers and sudden, aggressive affection. Sloane was the first to change. Before the fall, Sloane visited Grandpa maybe twice a year, usually when she needed a backdrop for a holiday photo, but suddenly, she was sending premium floral arrangements every Tuesday. They were not the kind of flowers you buy to cheer someone up. They were architectural sculptures, cold and imposing, that took up half the dining table. Then came the video calls. I would be in the kitchen making soup, and I would hear Sloane's voice booming from the living room. She would FaceTime him on the iPad she had insisted on buying him. Despite him preferring his old landline, "Grandpa, look at you! You look so strong today!" she would shout, her voice pitched high and unnatural. I remember standing in the doorway one afternoon, watching him stare at the screen. He looked tired. He was wearing his old cardigan, the one with the moth hole in the sleeve. On the screen, Sloane was perfectly lit, sitting in her minimalist office. "I was just telling Mom how lucid you are," Sloane said, and there was a weird cadence to her sentence. "You are completely aware of your assets. Right, Grandpa? You know exactly what is going on with the accounts?" Walter frowned. "I know I'm eating tomato soup for lunch." "Sloane, why are you asking about accounts?" "Just checking in. We worry about you. We just want to make sure no one is confusing you." She paused, and her eyes darted to the corner of her screen, as if she were checking a recording indicator. That was when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. She wasn't having a conversation. She was building a transcript. She was trying to get him to say he was fine, or conversely, trying to catch him saying something confused that she could use later to prove incompetence. It was a trap, and she was laying it in broad daylight. Then my parents started showing up. Victor and Janine did not bring soup. They brought folders. They came over on a rainy Sunday, shaking their umbrellas out in the foyer with a sort of frantic energy. My father walked straight past me, barely nodding, and went into the study. My mother hovered in the kitchen, running a finger along the countertops to check for dust. "You look tired, Avery," she said, not with sympathy, but with judgment. "Maybe this is too much for you. We were thinking it might be better if we hired professional management for the house and the paperwork." "I am handling the bills, Mom," I said. "Grandpa signs the checks. I just mail them." "But who is tracking the investments?" she asked, her eyes drifting toward the hallway where the study was. "Dad has accounts from 40 years ago, paper certificates, bonds, if those get lost." She let the sentence hang. Meanwhile, I could hear drawers opening and closing in the study, the slide of metal on metal. I walked into the study. My father was standing at the heavy oak desk. He had one of the drawers open, the one where Grandpa kept his personal correspondence. "What are you doing?" I asked. Victor jumped. He actually jumped. "I was looking for a stamp," he lied. "I need to mail a letter. The stamps are in the kitchen drawer," I said. "Where they have been for 20 years. He slammed the drawer shut. "He is old, Avery. He forgets things. I am just trying to make sure his affairs are in order. We need to know where the deeds are, the life insurance policies, the combination to the floor safe." "He knows where they are," I said. "But does he?" Victor challenged, his face reddening. "Or are you keeping that information for yourself?" That was the dynamic. They projected their own greed onto me, because they could not imagine doing something for love. They assumed I must be doing it for profit. But the breaking point, the moment that truly built the wall we just saw in the courtroom, happened 3 weeks later. It was a Tuesday night, almost 9 o'clock. The rain was hammering against the windows. Walter was in his leather recliner, watching an old Western movie. Dozing off. The doorbell rang. It was late for a visitor. I went to the door and peered through the peephole. A man I didn't recognize was standing on the porch. He was wearing a cheap raincoat and holding a plastic clipboard protected by a Ziploc bag. I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" "Mobile notary," the man said. He looked harried, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I have an appointment with Mr. Walter Hargrove. Priority signature." I frowned. "We didn't call a notary." "Order came in from a V. Harper," the man said, checking his phone. "Victor Harper. Said it was urgent. Estate documents. I just need to verify the ID of the signer and witness the signature. Takes 5 minutes." My stomach dropped. They had sent a stranger to the house at night to get Grandpa to sign something. A power of attorney? A deed transfer? A modification to the will? They were counting on me being asleep, or maybe they thought I was stupid enough to let him in. I was about to slam the door, but Walter's voice drifted from the living room. "Who is it? Avery?" "It's a mistake. Grandpa," I called back. "Let him in," Walter said. His voice was not sleepy anymore. It was sharp. I opened the door. The man shook his umbrella and stepped into the foyer. Dripping water on the hardwood, he looked relieved. He pulled a thick document out of his bag. "Mr. Hargrove?" the notary asked, walking toward the living room. "Sorry for the late hour. Your son said this had to be done tonight before the markets open tomorrow." Walter didn't stand up. He just looked at the man. Then he looked at the document. He didn't reach for his reading glasses. "Did my son tell you what is in that document?" Walter asked. "I'm just the notary, sir," the man said, clicking a pen. "I don't draft them. I just verify identity and signature. If you could just sign right here on the tab." He thrust the clipboard toward Walter. Walter looked at the pen. Then he looked at me. "Avery, get my phone." "Sir?" "This will only take a second," the notary pressed, stepping closer. "Then you can go back to your movie." "I am not signing anything," Walter said. His voice was low, but it had the rumble of a subterranean train. "And you are going to leave my house." "But the fee has been paid," the man protested. "Your son." "My son," Walter interrupted, "is not the homeowner. I am And if you are not off my porch in 30 seconds, my granddaughter is going to call the police and report a trespassing and an attempted fraud." The notary looked at Walter, then at me. He saw the phone in my hand. He realized this wasn't the confused old man he had been promised. He put the cap back on his pen, muttered something about just doing his job, and backed out the door. When the lock clicked shut, the silence in the room was heavy. Walter turned off the TV. The Western movie faded to black. He gestured for me to sit on the ottoman in front of him. He looked older in that light, the shadows settling into the deep lines of his face, but his eyes were furious. "They are not waiting for me to die," he said softly. "They are trying to bury me while I'm still sitting in this chair." "I won't let them in again," I promised, my hands shaking. "It's not about the door. Avery," he said. He leaned forward and took my hand. His skin was like dry paper, warm and fragile. "They don't want to care for me. They want my signature. They want to strip the assets before the taxman comes, or before I decide to give it all to a cat shelter. They are scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that I see them," he said. "Scared that I know exactly who they are." The next morning, Walter did something he hadn't done in years. He put on a suit. It hung loosely on his frame, the shoulders a little too wide now, but he tied his tie with a perfect Windsor knot. "We are going for a drive," he announced. "Where?" I asked. "To see a man about a wall," he said cryptically. He directed me to an office building in the city center. But it wasn't the firm his family had used for decades. It wasn't the flashy firm with the billboards on the highway. It was a discreet building with a bronze plaque that read, "Ironwood Fiduciary." When we got to the waiting room, he stopped me. "You stay here," he ordered. "Grandpa, I should come in with you, to take notes." "No," he said firmly. "You sit right here, you read a magazine, you drink their bad coffee. If anyone asks you later, you tell them you sat in this chair and played Sudoku. You did not hear a word. You did not see a paper. You are the driver, not the conspirator." He went behind the frosted glass doors. He was in there for 3 hours. I sat and worried. I worried he would get confused. I worried he would have a health episode. But when he came out, he didn't look tired. He looked lighter. He looked like a man who had just unloaded a 50-pound rucksack. He was carrying a thick blue folder. On the ride home, he didn't speak about the trust. He didn't speak about money. He asked me about my art. He asked me if I was happy. When we got back to the house, he sat me down at the kitchen table. He opened the blue folder and took out a simple spiral-bound notebook. "This is your job now," he said. "What is it?" "It is the log," he said. "From this moment on, Avery, you are a stenographer. Every time Sloan calls, you write down the time and the duration. Every time your father comes over, you write down what he asks for. Every time a strange car parks out front, you write down the license plate." "Why?" I asked. "This feels paranoid." "It is not paranoid if they are actually hunting you," he said. "And they are hunting. They are building a case. Avery. They are going to say I was senile. They are going to say you manipulated me. They are going to say you isolated me to steal my money. That is the narrative they are writing." He tapped the notebook with his index finger. "We are going to write the truth, but we are going to write it in data, not feelings, data." He looked me dead in the eye, and that was the moment the grandfather I knew, the gentle gardener, merged with the man who had built a business empire from nothing. "If they drag you to court," he said, his voice steady as steel, "I want the court to see order, not tears. I want them to see a ledger, not a diary. Judges don't trust crying women, Avery, but they trust a timestamp." So I wrote, for the last 6 months of his life. I became a ghost in my own house. I documented every aggressive text message from Sloan. I logged the day my mother tried to fire the cleaning lady Walter had employed for 20 years because she cost too much. I logged the second attempt by a different notary. I logged the date Victor tried to access the online banking with a guest password and got the account locked. I filled 3 notebooks. I thought I was just protecting him. I didn't realize I was loading the gun that the man in the black suit would eventually fire. Walter knew. He knew exactly how this would play out. He knew Sloan would rush to court before the dirt was settled on his grave. He knew they would try to crush me with legal fees and accusations of incompetence. He had sat in that leather chair, watching the rain, and he had checkmated them 5 moves before they even touched a pawn. I looked at the judge now, holding the envelope that had come from that secret meeting at Ironwood. I remembered the last thing Walter said to me about the folder. 2 days before he died. He had squeezed my hand, his grip weak, but his eyes bright. "The truth is a quiet thing, Avery," he had whispered. "Let them scream. Let them perform. When the time comes, you won't have to say a word. The paper will speak for you." And now, in this frozen courtroom, the paper was finally speaking. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of a library, but the vacuum of a pressurized airlock just before the seal breaks. The man in the black suit stood like a monolith before the bench. He did not shift his weight. He did not fidget with his cuffs. He simply waited, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, watching Judge Holloway read the contents of the envelope. I watched the judge's face. Holloway was a man who had seen everything: petty family squabbles, bitter divorces, fraudulent claims, so his expression usually rested in a permanent state of bored skepticism. But as his eyes scanned the document, that boredom evaporated. His eyebrows knitted together. He adjusted his glasses, leaning closer to the paper as if he wanted to ensure the words were not hallucinated. He flipped to the second page. The sound of the paper turning was the loudest thing in the room. Scritch, snap. Then, Holloway looked up. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at the man in black. "This is an authenticated copy?" the judge asked. "The original is held in our vault at Ironwood Fiduciary and Trust Services in Delaware," the man replied. His voice was smooth, baritone, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I have the certification of the clerk of the Court of Chancery attached as Exhibit B." "Ironwood," the judge muttered. He knew the name. It wasn't a local firm that handled traffic tickets. It was a fortress. Sterling, Sloan's lawyer, could not take it anymore. The silence was eating into his billable confidence. He stepped forward, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum. "Your Honor, I must insist on seeing whatever document has been introduced ex parte," Sterling said, his voice tight. "We have a filed motion. We have a valid will. We have an executor present. Unless this gentleman is from the district attorney's office, he has no standing to interrupt these proceedings." Judge Holloway looked at Sterling over the rim of his glasses. It was a look of profound pity. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said quietly, "you are arguing for the distribution of an estate that effectively no longer exists." Sloan made a noise in her throat. A sharp, strangled gasp. "What do you mean? Doesn't exist. My grandfather was wealthy. He owned the house, the portfolio, the patent rights. They didn't just vanish." "They did not vanish, Ms. Harper," the man in black said, turning his head slightly to address her without actually turning his body. "They moved." The judge handed the file down to the court clerk. "Mark this as Defense Exhibit 1. The court recognizes the existence of the Walter Hargrove Revocable Living Trust, dated and funded fully 8 months prior to the date of death." "A trust?" Sterling scoffed. "We knew about the trust. The will pours over into the trust. Ms. Sloan Harper is the successor trustee. That is standard estate planning. It changes nothing about her authority." "You are mistaken," the man in black said. He walked over to the defense table, my table, and placed a duplicate envelope in front of me. Then he walked to the plaintiff's table and placed one in front of Sterling. He moved with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. "If you will look at Article 4, Section 2, the man said. Sterling ripped the envelope open. Sloan leaned over his shoulder, her manicured nails digging into the sleeve of his jacket. I opened mine slowly. I knew what it was going to say. But seeing it in print, on heavy bond paper with the ironwood watermark, made it real. The grantor, the man in the black suit recited from memory. Staring at the back wall, hereby removes any family member from the position of successor trustee due to a conflict of interest. The sole successor trustee shall be Ironwood Fiduciary and Trust Services. The trustee shall have absolute discretion over the distribution of assets. Sloane's face went white, not pale. White, like the blood had been drained out of her to fuel the sudden rage building in her eyes. "This is a forgery," she hissed. "Grandpa wouldn't do this. He trusted me. I was the one who helped him with his accounts." "According to the logs provided to our compliance department," the man in black said, "your assistance was noted and flagged as a liability." "This is absurd," Sterling shouted, throwing the paper onto the table. "Your Honor, I move to strike this document. We have a will from 2019 that explicitly names Sloane Harper. This document is a late edition. It was likely signed under duress. The deceased was 89 years old. He was living with the defendant, Avery Harper, who clearly exercised undue influence to get this change made." "Undue influence," the judge repeated. He looked at the file again. "Mr. Sterling, this trust amendment was notarized by a specialist from the firm. Witnesses were present, and there is an attached affidavit of capacity from a neurologist, dated the same day." The judge looked at me. For the first time, there was respect in his eyes. He realized that while Sloane was playing checkers, someone on my side had been playing three-dimensional chess. "Furthermore," the man in black continued, and his voice dropped a register, becoming somehow heavier. "The assets were retitled. The house is not owned by Walter Hargrove. It is owned by the trust. The brokerage accounts are owned by the trust. The patent residuals are owned by the trust. Therefore, this probate court has no jurisdiction over those assets. You are petitioning for control of an empty checking account that contains, by my last estimate, about $400 in Social Security back pay." My father, Victor, finally spoke. He stood up in the gallery. His face flushed a deep, unhealthy red. "Now see here," he boomed, using his boardroom voice. "This is a family matter. We are not going to let some corporate vulture steal my father's money. We will contest this. We will drag this out until that trust is broken into 1,000 pieces." The man in black turned slowly to face my father. The movement was so deliberate it felt predatory. "I was hoping you would say that," the man said. He looked back at the judge. "Your Honor, please direct the plaintiff's attention to Article 9. Sterling was flipping pages frantically. The sound of paper snapping was the rhythm of his panic. He found Article 9. He stopped. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Read it. Mr. Sterling," the judge ordered. Sterling swallowed hard. He adjusted his collar, which seemed to have suddenly become 2 sizes too tight. "It is a no-contest clause," Sterling stammered. "Read the text," the judge commanded. Sterling cleared his throat. "If any beneficiary under this trust contests the validity of this trust, or files any legal action to alter the distribution plan, or challenges the appointment of the trustee, then that beneficiary's share shall be revoked in its entirety. They shall be treated as if they had predeceased the grantor, leaving no issue." The room went dead silent. It was the nuclear option, the in terrorem clause. My grandfather hadn't just built a wall. He had electrified it. Sloane was staring at the paper, her lips moving silently as she read the words over and over again, revoked in its entirety. "That means," the judge said, leaning back in his chair, "that by filing this motion today, asking the court to override the trust structure, you may have just walked your client off a cliff." "We didn't know!" Sloane shrieked. Her composure shattered completely. The cool, wealthy socialite was gone, replaced by a desperate woman watching her future evaporate. "We didn't know about this amendment. We were operating under the 2019 will. You can't punish us for what we didn't know." The judge's eyes narrowed. He looked at the man in black. "Mr. Trustee, is that true? Was this amendment kept secret?" The existence of the trust was communicated to the family's legal representation 3 days ago, the man in black said calmly. We have a read receipt on the email sent to Mr. Sterling's firm, including a specific citation of the no contest clause. All eyes turned to Sterling. Sterling turned a shade of gray, usually reserved for old concrete. I'm my paralegal. The email might have gone to spam. I have hundreds of emails a day. Your Honor, we filed this motion in good faith. Good faith? The judge laughed, a dry barking sound. You filed an emergency ex parte motion to seize assets before the body was even cold. Mr. Sterling, that is not good faith. That is a raid. The judge turned his gaze to Sloane. It was a piercing look, the kind that strips away pretenses. Ms. Harper, the judge said, I want you to answer me carefully. Did you know your grandfather had met with Ironwood? Did you know he had restructured his estate? Sloane looked at her lawyer. Sterling was staring at his shoes. She looked at our parents. They were frozen statues of horror. She looked at me. I held her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just watched. He was sick, Sloane blurted out. He was confused. Avery was living there. She controlled his phone. She controlled his mail. If he signed this, it was because she told him to. She poisoned him against us. That is not what I asked, the judge snapped. He picked up his gavel, weighing it in his hand. I asked if you knew. I knew he was acting strangely, Sloane cried. I knew he was hiding things. That's why we had to act. He was being influenced. Influenced, the judge repeated. He looked at the man in black. Does the trust have a position on this accusation? The man in black reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a second, smaller envelope. We anticipated this specific line of argumentation, the man said. This is a sealed letter from Walter Hargrove. He instructed that it be read only if his capacity or his intent was challenged in open court. Open it, the judge said. The man in black handed it to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. Holloway opened it. He read it in silence. His face softened, just for a fraction of a second, before hardening back into judicial stone. The letter, the judge said, looking at Sloane, details specific dates and times. It details conversations. It details a mobile notary incident. My father flinched in the gallery. It seems, the judge continued, that Mr. Hargrove was vividly aware of his actions. He writes here, my granddaughter Sloane believes love is a transaction. She will try to void my wishes not because she cares for me, but because she has already spent the money in her mind. Sloane gasped. That is a lie. Avery wrote that. It is in his handwriting, the judge said coldly, and it was witnessed. The judge placed the letter down and looked at Sloane with a terrifying intensity. Ms. Harper, here is the situation. You are standing in a probate court asking for assets that are under the jurisdiction of a trust. You have triggered a no-contest clause that threatens to wipe out your inheritance completely. The trustee has evidence that you were notified. The record shows you proceeded anyway. I withdraw the motion, Sterling shouted. Your Honor, we withdraw the motion. We are dismissing the case without prejudice, right now. You cannot unring a bell. Mr. Sterling, the judge said. You filed the papers. You stood in my courtroom. You made the accusation. But we haven't litigated, Sterling pleaded, sweat now visible on his forehead. We are just inquiring. This was an inquiry. We are not contesting the trust. We love the trust. We are just clarifying. The man in black spoke up. Ironwood views this hearing as a direct contest. The plaintiff explicitly sought to bypass the trust and seize control of the assets. I will determine that, the judge said. He looked at the clock. However, given the complexity of the no-contest enforcement, I am not going to rule on the disinheritance today. That requires a separate hearing. Sloane let out a breath, thinking she had dodged the bullet. But, the judge continued, raising his voice, I am denying your motion for control. I am recognizing the Ironwood Trust as the sole legal owner of the assets, and I am issuing a warning. He leaned forward, his black robe bunching around his shoulders. If I find evidence that you knew about this trust and filed this motion simply to harass your sister or drain the estate with legal fees, I will not only uphold the disinheritance, I will sanction you for abuse of the legal process. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Sloane whispered. She looked small now. The camel coat no longer looked like armor. It looked like a blanket she was hiding under. "Mr. Trustee," the judge said, "you are in control of the assets?" "I am, Your Honor," the man in black said. "We have already secured the properties. The accounts are frozen pending our internal audit." "Good," the judge said. "Then this court is adjourned regarding the emergency motion." He slammed the gavel down. Bang! The sound was final. It echoed off the wood paneling, signaling the end of the round, but as the noise faded, the man in black did not leave. He turned to me. "Ms. Harper," he said, "do not leave yet." Sloane was scrambling to gather her purse, her face a mask of humiliation. My parents were already heading for the exit, unable to look me in the eye. "Why?" I asked the man in black. "Because," he said, and for the first time, his expression shifted. It wasn't a smile, but it was something close to approval. "The game is not over. They just realize they are playing it. And when people like that realize they are losing, they stop using lawyers and start using other things." "What other things?" I asked. "Lies," he said. "And they are going to tell a very big one about you." As if on cue, Sterling stopped at the door, turned back, and looked at the judge who was gathering his files. "Your Honor," Sterling called out, "before we go, we would like to place on the record that we intend to file a separate motion regarding elder abuse." The room, which had just started to relax, snapped back into tension. "We have witnesses," Sterling said, his voice regaining some of its slime. "Witnesses who will testify that Avery Harper isolated the deceased, that she cut the phone lines, that she medicated him to keep him compliant." Sloane turned back, her eyes gleaming with a new, vicious light. This was their backup plan. If they couldn't get the money by right, they would get it by destroying the person who stood in their way. "We will be filing criminal complaints," Sterling added. The judge paused. He looked at me. "That is a serious accusation, Counselor." "We treat it seriously," Sterling said. The man in black stepped in front of me. He didn't speak to Sterling. He spoke to me, low enough that only I could hear. "Let them file," he said. "We have the logs." But as I looked at Sloane's face, twisted with a toxic mix of fear and vengeance, I realized that Grandpa was right. The wall was built, but they were going to try to climb over it with dirty boots. "This isn't about the money anymore, is it?" I whispered to the man in black. "No," he replied, closing his briefcase with a sharp click. "Now, it is a war." The air in the courtroom didn't just shift. It curdled. The moment the words, "elder abuse," left Sterling's mouth. The atmosphere went from a legal dispute to something far uglier. It was no longer about money or trusts or signatures. It was an assassination of character. Sloane did not shrink back after her lawyer dropped the bomb. Instead, she seemed to inflate, drawing energy from the sheer toxicity of the accusation. She turned her body toward Judge Holloway, her face rearranging itself into a mask of righteous concern that I had seen her practice in mirrors since we were teenagers. "We didn't want to bring this up, Your Honor," Sloane said, her voice trembling with a vibration that was almost perfect. "We wanted to handle this privately. But if my sister is going to hide behind a trust document that she clearly coerced my grandfather into signing, we have no choice. We have to speak for the victim." The victim. She called the man she had ignored for a decade a victim. Behind her, my mother, Janine, let out a sob. It was a sharp, piercing sound. She pulled a handkerchief from her purse, a lace-trimmed thing she must have packed specifically for this moment, and pressed it to her dry eyes. My father, Victor, sat up straighter, puffing out his chest like a general sending troops into a battle he had no intention of fighting himself. This was the plan B. If they couldn't steal the money with a pen, they would steal it with a lie. "This is a serious charge," Judge Holloway said. His voice was no longer bored. It was icy. He did not look at the weeping mother or the indignant sister. He looked at the evidence file. You are alleging that Ms. Avery Harper physically or mentally abused the decedent? She isolated him, Sloane cried out, stepping away from her table. She moved into his house and cut us off. Every time we called, she said he was sleeping. Every time we tried to visit, she had an excuse. She changed the locks. She controlled his medication. She made him dependent on her so she could force him to sign these ridiculous papers. Sterling stepped in, trying to translate Sloane's hysteria into legal grounds. Your Honor, this is a classic case of undue influence escalating into custodial abuse. We believe the deceased was in a state of cognitive decline and was manipulated by the defendant, who had total control over his environment. I felt the blood drain from my face. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vomit. I looked at the man in the black suit, the trustee. He was standing perfectly still, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall, completely unbothered by the noise. Ms. Harper, the judge said to me, do you have a response? It's a lie, I whispered. My voice failed me. It is all a lie. Of course she says that, Sloane shouted. But we have witnesses. Witnesses? The judge raised an eyebrow. Who? Sloane gestured to the back of the room. My aunt, Brenda, and my cousin, Paul, they saw it. They saw how she treated him. I turned around. Aunt Brenda and Cousin Paul were sitting in the back row, looking like they wished they could dissolve into the wood paneling. They were distant relatives, the kind we only saw at funerals, usually hovering near the buffet. I hadn't seen them at Grandpa's house in 5 years. Approach the bench, the judge ordered them. Brenda walked up, clutching her purse like a shield. Paul followed, looking at his shoes. State your names for the record, the judge said. Brenda Miller, my aunt said, her voice squeaking. Paul Miller? My cousin mumbled. You have sworn testimony regarding the care of Walter Hargrove? The judge asked. Well, Brenda started, glancing nervously at Sloane, who was staring at her with laser-like intensity. We went to visit Walter about 6 months ago. We stopped by. And? The judge pressed. And Avery wouldn't let us in, Brenda said. She stood at the door and said he wasn't up for visitors. She looked aggressive. Aggressive, the judge repeated. Did she threaten you? She just said to go away, Brenda said. But we saw Walter through the window. He was sitting in his chair, just staring. He looked thin, like he wasn't being fed right. He was 89, I said, unable to stop myself. He had lost appetite due to the medication. Silence, the judge snapped at me, then turned back to Brenda. Did you report this observation to Adult Protective Services? No, Brenda said. Did you call the police? No. Did you call his doctor? We didn't know who his doctor was, Paul chimed in. So, Judge Holloway said, leaning forward, you saw an elderly relative who you believed was being starved and isolated, and your reaction was to do nothing for 6 months, until the day his wealthy estate was being contested in court? Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Sloane. Sloane's eyes were wide, urging her to say something, anything. We didn't want to cause family trouble, Brenda stammered. But you are causing it now, the judge said. Step back. He looked at Sterling. Is that the extent of your evidence, counselor? 2 relatives who claim the defendant was gatekeeping but failed to act on any perceived danger? We have the isolation itself. Your Honor, Sterling argued, sweating now. The defendant controlled the phone lines. We have logs showing that calls from the family were blocked. The man in the black suit finally moved. He didn't step forward aggressively. He simply unclasped his briefcase again. The sound was a sharp snap that cut through Sterling's rambling. Your Honor, the trustee said, his voice calm and resonant. If I may. Please, the judge said, looking relieved to have a professional in the room. The accusation is that Ms. Avery Harper controlled the deceased's communication and environment to facilitate undue influence, the man said. Ironwood fiduciary takes such allegations seriously. Before we accepted the role of trustee, we conducted our own due diligence regarding the grantor's independence. He pulled out a document, bound in a blue cover. Exhibit C, the man announced. This is a sworn affidavit from Dr. Aris Thorne, a board-certified neurologist. He examined Walter Hargrove privately on the 14th of August. That is the same week the trust was funded. The trustee handed the document to the clerk. The exam was not conducted at the house. The trustee continued. It was conducted at Dr. Thorne's office. Mr. Hargrove arrived by taxi, alone. Sloane's jaw dropped. That's impossible. Avery drove him everywhere. Not everywhere, the trustee corrected, not looking at her. Mr. Hargrove was quite capable of using a ride-sharing app. We have the receipts. He went to the doctor alone specifically to establish a medical baseline of competency without his granddaughter present. Dr. Thorne's report states that Mr. Hargrove was alert, oriented to person, place, and time, and exhibited high-level executive function regarding his financial planning. The judge read the report, nodding slowly. He scored 29 out of 30 on the cognitive assessment. Exactly, the trustee said. Hardly the score of a man being drugged into submission. But the isolation, Sterling insisted, grasping at straws. She blocked our numbers. That is a fact. We have the phone records as well, the trustee said, pulling out another sheet. It is true that numbers belonging to Sloane Harper, Victor Harper, and Janine Harper were blocked on the landline. See? Sloane shrieked triumphantly. She admits it. However, the trustee continued, his voice overriding hers without raising in volume. The records show the blocking request was made by the subscriber. We have the audio recording of the call to the telephone company. The man produced a small USB drive and placed it on the judge's bench. Mr. Hargrove called the service provider himself. He verified his identity with his social security number. He explicitly asked, and I quote from the transcript, "How do I stop these people from harassment calling me during my nap time?" A few people in the gallery chuckled. My father turned purple. Furthermore, the judge said, looking at the file the trustee had just handed him, I have a question about this total control theory. Mr. Sterling, you claim the deceased was a prisoner in his own home? Essentially, yes, Your Honor. Then can you explain? The judge asked. Why on September 3rd? Mr. Hargrove used his personal cell phone, the one you claim was confiscated, to call a local pizza delivery service, and 2 days later, to call the non-emergency line of the fire department to ask about burn permit regulations? The courtroom went silent. He called for pizza? Sterling asked. Deflated. Pepperoni and mushroom, the judge read from the invoice attached to the trustee's report. Hardly the actions of a man locked in a dungeon. Sloane looked around the room. Her eyes wild. She was losing the narrative. The poor old grandpa story was dissolving, revealing the sharp, capable man Walter actually was. This is all faked, Sloane yelled. The trustee is in on it. They are conspiring with Avery to steal the money. That man, she pointed a shaking finger at the man in black, he's probably her boyfriend or something. It was a desperate, ugly thing to say. The man in black turned to her. His expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to darken. Ms. Harper, he said, I am a fiduciary officer licensed by the state. My relationship to the beneficiary is purely contractual. However, my relationship to the grantor, your grandfather, was one of strict instruction. He reached into the briefcase one last time. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax. Mr. Hargrove anticipated this exact moment, the trustee said. He told me, when they realize they cannot win on the law, they will try to destroy Avery's reputation. They will call her a jailer. They will call her a thief. He didn't say that, my mother whispered from the gallery, her hand over her mouth. He did, the trustee said, and he wrote it down. He handed the envelope to the judge. This is the letter of explanation regarding disinheritance and guardianship. He asked that it be entered into the public record only if an accusation of abuse was leveled against his granddaughter. The judge broke the wax seal. The crack was loud. He unfolded the letter. He began to read, his eyes moving back and forth across the page. After a long minute, the judge cleared his throat. He looked at me, and his eyes were soft. Then he looked at Sloane, and his eyes were granite. "I will read a portion of this into the record," Judge Holloway said. He held up the paper. "To the court. My family will tell you that Avery isolated me. The truth is, I isolated myself from them to find some peace in my final days. They were not blocked because Avery controlled the phone. They were blocked because every time I spoke to them, I felt like a carcass being circled by vultures. Avery did not keep them out. I did. I asked her to stand at the door because I did not have the strength to look my son in the eye and tell him I was ashamed of what he had become. My father let out a sound like he had been punched in the gut. He slumped back against the bench. Do not let them stain Avery's name." The judge continued reading. "She was the only one who treated me like a man, not an ATM. If they accuse her of abuse, know this. The only abuse that occurred in this family was the neglect I suffered from my children until I broke my hip and became a financial opportunity." The judge lowered the letter. Sloane was shaking. She wasn't crying. She was vibrating with a mix of rage and humiliation. Her narrative had been stripped naked and paraded in front of the court. Sterling stood up. He looked sick. He started shoving papers into his briefcase. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice barely a whisper. "In light of this new evidence and the personal nature of the decedent's writings, we would like to withdraw the motion for an elder abuse investigation. Sit down. Mr. Sterling," the judge roared. Sterling froze. "You do not get to ring the bell of elder abuse and then unring it just because the evidence blew up in your face," the judge said, his voice shaking the walls. "You accused a young woman of a felony in open court. You dragged her reputation through the mud based on the testimony of two people who haven't seen the deceased in 6 months. We were acting on client instructions," Sterling pleaded. "Then your client gave you bad instructions," the judge snapped, "and you failed to verify them." The judge turned to the court reporter. "Let the record show that the accusation of elder abuse is found to be baseless, malicious, and directly contradicted by the decedent's own authenticated testimony." He looked at Sloane. "You wanted a fight, Ms. Harper? You wanted to air the family laundry. Well, you have aired it, and now the stench is on you." "I want to go," Sloane whispered. She grabbed her purse. "I want to leave." "You are not dismissed," the judge said. "This is a court of law, not a dinner party you can walk out of because the conversation got awkward." The judge turned to the trustee. "Does the trust wish to pursue sanctions regarding this frivolous filing?" The man in black looked at me. He was waiting for my signal. I looked at Sloane. She looked small, defeated, and pathetic. But I also remembered the look in her eyes 5 minutes ago when she thought she could send me to jail to get a beach house. I nodded at the man in black. "The trust moves for full costs," the trustee said calmly, "and we request that the transcript of today's hearing be attached to the final probate order, so that any future attempts to litigate this matter in other jurisdictions will be met with the established facts." "So ordered," the judge said. "Mr. Sterling, you and your client are not going anywhere until the clerk calculates the filing fees and the trustee submits his billable hours for this morning's defense. And let me warn you, if I see one more motion that smells like harassment, I will refer you to the state bar." Sterling collapsed into his chair. Sloane stared straight ahead, her face pale as a sheet. The man in black closed his briefcase again. He leaned toward me. "They are broken," he said softly. "But they are not done. Desperate people do dangerous things when the law stops working for them." "What's left?" I asked. "The judge hates them. The evidence hates them." "The court of public opinion," the man said. "Sloane Harper cannot survive being cut off. She has debts you don't know about. And now that she can't get the money from the trust, She is going to try to get it by destroying the trust's reputation. Brace yourself. Avery. The papers are finished, but the noise is just beginning. As he spoke, I saw Sloane pull her phone out under the table. She wasn't texting. She was typing furiously, her thumbs flying across the screen. She wasn't messaging a lawyer. She was messaging a contact list. The man in black was right. The legal battle was over, but the street fight was about to start. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut behind us, muting the buzz of the gallery and the rhythmic strike of Judge Holloway's gavel. The silence of the hallway was sudden and jarring, like stepping out of a wind tunnel. I leaned back against the cool plaster of the corridor wall and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for 3 days. My hands were trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the adrenaline crash. "Breathe, Avery," a voice said beside me. "In through the nose, out through the mouth. The physiology of panic takes about 20 minutes to reset." Nolan Pierce was standing there, checking his watch with the casual air of a man waiting for a train. Nolan was my attorney of record, the man Ironwood had assigned to handle the civilian side of things while the trustee handled the heavy artillery. If the man in the black suit was a broadsword, Nolan was a scalpel. He was 40-something, wore rimless glasses, and had a demeanor so calm he could probably nap during a hurricane. He hadn't said much inside the courtroom because the trustee had controlled the floor, but outside here, in the tactical reality of the hallway, he was in charge. "It's over, right?" I asked, looking at the ceiling. The judge denied the motion. He threatened them with sanctions. "It's done." Nolan didn't answer immediately. He tucked a file under his arm and started walking toward the elevators. "Walk with me. We shouldn't linger on this floor." I pushed off the wall and fell into step beside him. "Nolan, it is done, isn't it?" "The hearing is done," Nolan corrected, pressing the down button. "The immediate threat to the asset transfer is neutralized. Judge Holloway was quite clear. Your sister's attempt to use the probate system to bypass the trust has failed." "So I can go home," I said. "I can go back to Grandpa's house and actually sleep." "You can go home," Nolan agreed, as the elevator doors chimed and slid open. We stepped into the empty car. "But you are not going to sleep. You are going to change the codes on your alarm system, and then you are going to wait for the locksmith I already called to arrive." "Locksmith? Why? Sloane doesn't have a key." "Sloane has something more dangerous than a key," Nolan said, watching the floor numbers count down. "She has desperation, and she has your father's knowledge of the property. Never underestimate a man who feels humiliated in public. Victor won't break a window, but he might try to use an old garage code to retrieve personal items. We are closing those doors." The elevator opened into the main lobby of the courthouse. It was bustling with lawyers, clerks, and confused citizens clutching jury summonses. Sunlight streamed in through the glass revolving doors, promising a normal world outside. I started to feel a little lighter. We had won. The no contest clause was triggered. The trust was secure. Grandpa's plan had worked. I reached into my bag to grab my sunglasses. Bzzzt, bzzzt. Nolan's phone vibrated. It wasn't a normal text notification. It was a rapid, triple pulse vibration that I could hear from 3 feet away. Nolan stopped walking. He didn't pull the phone out casually. He whipped it from his inner pocket like a weapon. He looked at the screen, and for the first time since I met him, his expression tightened. "Hold on," he said. He tapped the screen, swiped through a menu, and held the phone to his ear. "Pierce here," he said. "Go ahead. Control." I watched him. The lobby traffic flowed around us, but Nolan was standing like a rock in a river. "Timestamp?" Nolan asked. He looked at his watch. "That is 3 minutes ago. We are not even out of the building yet." He listened for another moment, his eyes scanning the crowd near the exit. "IP address?" Nolan asked. He pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote a string of numbers on the back of his hand. "Device signature?" He looked at me. His eyes were hard. "Understood. Lock it down. Hard freeze?" No overrides without voice authentication from me or the trustee directly, and flag the attempt for the legal file. I want the log sent to my email in 30 seconds. He hung up. The screen of his phone was glowing with a red banner I hadn't seen before. It bore the Ironwood logo. "What is it?" I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach again. "Is it the judge?" "No," Nolan said. His voice was low. "It's your sister." "Sloane?" "She's still upstairs packing her bag." "Physically, yes," Nolan said. "Digitally, she is very busy. That was the Ironwood Security Monitoring Center. Someone just attempted to access the beneficiary portal for the Hargrove Trust." "But she doesn't have the password," I said. "They didn't try to log in with a password," Nolan explained, guiding me quickly toward the side exit, away from the main doors. "They initiated a forgot password reset. They used your grandfather's social security number, his date of birth, and his mother's maiden name to bypass the first security layer." "She knows all that," I said. "She's family." "Right," Nolan said. "But here's the kicker. After they bypassed the security questions, they tried to change the two-factor authentication number." I blinked, trying to understand the tech speak. "What does that mean?" "It means," Nolan said, pushing the glass door open and steering me out onto the sidewalk, "that she wasn't trying to just look at the account. She was trying to hijack it. If you change the authentication number to your own burner phone, you can approve wire transfers, you can intercept bank alerts, you can drain a liquid cash account in about 10 minutes. "She tried to rob the trust?" I asked, my voice rising. 10 minutes after the judge told her to stop? "Technically," Nolan said, scanning the street for his car. "She tried to become the trust. If she controls the portal, she controls the distribution. She was trying to beat the paperwork to the bank." I stopped walking. The realization hit me like a physical slap. I remembered the moment in the courtroom, right after the trustee had entered. Sloane had slumped in her chair. I thought she was crying or hiding her face in shame, but I remembered seeing her shoulders moving. I remembered the glow of a screen under the table. She wasn't crying. She was texting. "She was doing it in the courtroom," I whispered. "When the man in black walked in when she realized she was losing, she texted someone. Or she did it herself," Nolan said. "We traced the device ID. It is an iPhone 15 Pro, registered to a billing address in Georgetown. That matches Sloane's residence." "She tried to hack the account while the judge was reading the riot act to her lawyer," I said. Stunned. "Who does that?" "Someone who owes a lot of money to people who don't care about probate courts," Nolan said darkly. "The trustee was right. This isn't just greed. Avery, this is panic. She needs that liquidity immediately." "So, what happened? Did she get in?" "No," Nolan said. "Ironwood's system is paranoid by design. When the request to change the phone number came in from a device that had never accessed the system before, the AI flagged it. It sent a verification push to your grandfather's original secure device, which the trustee has in his pocket. He blocked it instantly." We reached Nolan's car, a black sedan that looked as nondescript as he did. He opened the passenger door for me. "Get in," he said. "We are not waiting for an Uber." I climbed in. The leather seat was cool. Nolan got in the driver's side and immediately plugged his phone into the dashboard. A map popped up, along with a digital timeline graph. "Look at this," Nolan said, pointing to the screen. It was a log of the attack. 11:42 a.m. Court adjourns. 11:45 a.m. Portal access attempt. User W. Hargrove. 11:46 a.m. Security question challenge. Passed. 11:47 a.m. 2F. A reset request. Mobile number ending in 449. 449, I said. "That's Sloane's personal cell. She used her own number?" "She is arrogant," Nolan said, starting the car. "Or she is sloppy. She probably thought that since she is a named beneficiary in the old will, she could argue it was a misunderstanding if she got caught." "Oh, I was just trying to update the contact info. It is a classic gray zone maneuver." "But she's caught now," I said. "Better," Nolan said. He tapped a button on the screen that said, Export log. We have a timestamp. I am sending this directly to Judge Holloway's clerk right now as a supplemental filing. Why? Because, Nolan said, pulling out into traffic. Sterling told the judge they were withdrawing their actions. He said they respected the court. 3 minutes later. His client tried to backdoor the system. This log proves that her apology was a lie. It proves bad faith in real time. When we go back for the sanctions hearing, this piece of paper is going to cost Sloan Harper another $50,000 in legal penalties. I watched the courthouse recede in the rearview mirror. I used to think of that building as the place where justice happened. Now I realized it was just a referee's whistle. The real game was happening on servers, on phones, in the invisible data streams that controlled our lives. They don't stop, do they? I asked. No, Nolan said. They don't. Your grandfather knew that. That is why he hired Ironwood. Most estate lawyers just write a will and wish you luck. Walter wanted a fortress. My phone buzzed in my hand. I jumped. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from my mother. Avery, please, we need to talk. Your father is having chest pains. The stress is killing him. Meet us at the house. Just family. No lawyers. I read it out loud to Nolan. Chest pains, Nolan repeated, his voice flat. The medical play. Classic. Should I go? I asked. What if it's real? If it were real, Nolan said, she would be texting 911. Not you, and she definitely wouldn't be adding the stipulation, no lawyers. He glanced at me. Do not reply. Do not answer. If you reply, you confirm that your channel is open. Silence is your best weapon right now. I looked at the text again. The stress is killing him. It was designed to hook right into my guilt. The guilt they had cultivated in me for 30 years. But then I looked at Nolan's dashboard, at the red log entry showing Sloan's attempt to rob the account 3 minutes ago. They were attacking from both sides. Sloan with the tech, Mom with the guilt. It was a coordinated pincer movement. Block the number? I asked. No, Nolan said. Don't block it. We need the evidence. Just mute it. Let them scream into the void. Every text they send is another brick in the wall we are building against them. I muted the conversation. I put the phone face down on my lap. Where are we going? I asked. Ironwood has a safe house, Nolan said. Or rather, a secure meeting site. The trustee wants to debrief you. There is something in the file that he didn't bring into the courtroom. What? I don't know, Nolan admitted. He plays his cards close to the vest. But he told me that if Sloan tried a digital breach, it means she is more vulnerable than we thought. He wants to show you why. We turned onto the highway. The city skyline loomed ahead, glass and steel shining in the sun. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Sloan was staring at an access-denied screen. Realizing that her quick hands hadn't been quick enough, I looked at my hands. They were still shaking, but it was different now. It wasn't fear. It was the vibration of a machine that had just started up. Okay, I said. Let's go see the man in black. Good, Nolan said. And Avery? Yeah? Welcome to the second round. The safe house was not a bunker. It was a sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 34th floor of a building that housed 3 different shell companies. It was the kind of place that didn't appear on Google Maps under a specific name, just a suite number that required 2 key cards to access. Nolan sat at the head of a long mahogany table, his laptop open. The screen cast a blue glow on his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw. I sat across from him, my grandfather's battered spiral-bound notebook in front of me. The contrast was striking. Nolan had the entire digital history of the trust at his fingertips, and I had a $3 notebook filled with ink stains and my own handwriting, but as we soon discovered, the truth required both. I have the raw logs from the trustee, Nolan said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Ironwood doesn't just track access. They track intent. They log keystrokes, dwell time, and IP triangulation. It is like a security camera for the digital world. It doesn't blink, and it doesn't forget. What are we looking for? I asked. We already know she tried to hack the portal after court. That was a reaction, Nolan said, his eyes scanning columns of data. I am looking for premeditation. Sloane stood in that courtroom and told Judge Holloway she was shocked, to learn about the trust. She claimed she was operating under the assumption that the 2019 will was the only valid document. He spun the laptop around so I could see the spreadsheet. It was a dense grid of dates, times, and server codes. This is the access log for the Walter Hargrove account for the last 6 months, Nolan explained. Look at the pattern. Most of it is your grandfather. Regular check-ins, 10 in the morning, Tuesdays and Thursdays, consistent duration of 5 minutes. He liked to check the bond yields, I said, a small smile touching my lips. He said it was better than reading the obituaries. Now look at the outliers, Nolan said, pointing to a cluster of entries highlighted in red. These logins didn't happen at 10 in the morning. They happened at 2 in the morning, or 11 at night, and they didn't come from his desktop computer. I leaned in. Mobile Safari, iOS 15. Sloane's operating system, Nolan said. But here's the catch. The IP address isn't from her house in Georgetown. It is from Stonebrook. Specifically, the residential node that covers your grandfather's neighborhood. I felt a chill run down my spine. I opened my notebook. I flipped through the pages until I found the dates Nolan was pointing to. August 12th, I read aloud. Sloane came over for dinner. She brought Thai food. She said she wanted to make peace. August 12th at 7:45 p.m. Nolan read from the screen. Failed login attempt. Password incorrect. I looked at the next date. September 3rd. She came to drop off some winter coats for him. She was only there for 20 minutes. September 3rd at 4:10 p.m., Nolan countered. Security question challenge initiated. What was the name of your first pet? Failed. The pattern was undeniable. It was sickeningly clear. Every time Sloane had come to the house feigning concern or affection, she had actually been on a reconnaissance mission. She wasn't visiting her dying grandfather. She was hunting for his credentials. She must have been sitting on his sofa, sipping tea, while secretly trying to brute force his banking passwords on her phone under the table. She lied to the court, I said, my voice hardening. She said she had no idea about the accounts, but she has been trying to break into them for months. It gets worse, Nolan said. He typed a command, and a new window popped up. This is what I was looking for, the smoking gun. He pointed to an entry dated just 2 weeks before Grandpa died. October 15th, Nolan said. A change of contact information form was uploaded to the secure portal. It wasn't a login attempt. It was a digitally signed request to route all future statements to a new email address. What email address? I asked. Nolan expanded the field. Sloane, H, Holdings Gmail.com. She tried to redirect the mail, Nolan said. She knew the trust existed. Avery, you don't try to update the contact info for an account you don't know about. She knew. She tried to hijack the communication stream so that when the time came, the statements would go to her, not Walter. Why was it rejected? Because Ironwood requires voice verification for contact changes on accounts over $1 million, Nolan said. They called Walter. He obviously denied it. But here's the crucial part. Sloane didn't know why it was denied. She probably thought it was a technical glitch. But this log proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that she was aware of the trust structure before she filed that lawsuit today. So when Sterling stood up and said, "We were blindsided," he was lying. I said, "He was either lying or his client lied to him." Nolan said, "And in the eyes of the law, it doesn't matter. They filed a sworn statement claiming ignorance. We have data proving knowledge. That is perjury. That is fraud on the court." Nolan picked up his phone and dialed a number. He didn't put it on speaker. "Get the courier service on the line," he said to whoever was on the other end. "I need the delivery signature for the disclosure package we sent to Sterling's firm." "Yes, the one with the trust abstract." He waited for a moment, tapping his pen on the table. "Timestamp?" Nolan asked. 8:30 a.m. this morning? Excellent. And who signed for it? A receptionist named Karen? Good. Send me the PDF. He hung up and looked at me with a grim satisfaction. We sent the full trust disclosure to Sterling's office at 8:30 this morning. The hearing was at 10. They had 90 minutes. They opened the package. They saw the no contest clause. And they decided to gamble that Judge Holloway wouldn't ask about it. They filed the motion anyway, hoping to steamroll you before the paperwork caught up. They walked into the trap, I said. They jumped, Nolan corrected. And now we are going to close the lid. He began typing furiously again. I am drafting an order to show cause. It is a demand for them to explain to the judge why they shouldn't be held in contempt for filing a frivolous motion and misleading the tribunal. We are attaching the logs. We are attaching the delivery receipt. We are attaching the dates from your notebook. Evidence doesn't scream, I murmured, remembering something Grandpa used to say. It just stands in line. Exactly, Nolan said. And this line is pointing straight at a dismissal with prejudice and significant financial sanctions. My phone buzzed on the mahogany table. It was the special ringtone I had assigned to my mother. A jarring, high-pitched chime. I looked at the screen. A preview of the text message popped up. Avery, stop this madness. Dad is at the hospital. He might need a stent. If you have any heart left, you will come home and sign whatever Sloan needs so we can pay for his care. Do not bring that lawyer. I felt the familiar hook in my gut. My father, the strong, invincible patriarch, suddenly reduced to a patient the moment he needed sympathy. Was it real? Or was it just another play? She says Dad is in the hospital, I said, my voice wavering. She says he needs a stent. Nolan didn't even look up from his screen. Which hospital? She didn't say. She just said, come home. If he were in the hospital, she would say General or Mercy or St. Jude's, Nolan said coldly. She is being vague on purpose. She wants you to go to the house. It is an ambush, Avery. But if he is sick, he has Medicare, Nolan said. And he has his own considerable savings that he hasn't spent because he was too busy trying to spend your grandfather's. You are not a doctor. Your presence changes nothing about his arterial blockage, but it changes everything about your legal standing. He reached over and took my phone. He didn't ask. He just took it. I am blocking them, Nolan said. Not just muting, blocking. For the next 48 hours, you are a ghost. You can't just cut me off from my mother, I protested, weaky. I am not cutting you off from your mother, Nolan said, tapping the screen. I am cutting you off from the opposition. Janine Harper is not acting as a mother right now. She is acting as an agent for Sloan. Every text is a subpoena in disguise. He set the phone back down. I am filing for an emergency protective order, Nolan announced. We are going to enjoin them from contacting any financial institution connected to the trust. We are going to flag their names with the credit bureaus. If they try to open a credit card in Walter's name, if they try to call the broker, if they try to walk into a bank branch and claim to be executors, the police will be called. That seems extreme, I said. Sloan tried to hack a secure server 3 minutes after a judge told her to stand down, Nolan said, looking me in the eye. There is no extreme anymore. There is only secure or compromised. We are locking the gates. He hit send on his laptop. The motion was filed. The evidence was submitted. The trap was sprung. The room was quiet for a moment. The hum of the building's HVAC system filled the silence. I felt a strange mixture of relief and grief. I was winning, yes, but I was also watching the final, irrevocable disintegration of my family. There would be no Thanksgiving dinners after this, no Christmas cards. I was orphanaging myself by choice. Then, the conference room phone rang. It wasn't a normal ring. It was a single, sharp tone. Nolan picked it up instantly. Pierce, he listened. His face, usually unreadable, shifted. His eyebrows pulled together. He looked at me, then looked away, staring out the glass wall at the city below. I understand, Nolan said. Is it verified? He listened again. Okay. Does the opposition have it? Pause. Not yet. Good. We need to get ahead of it. Nolan hung up the phone. He didn't go back to his laptop. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with his tie. A nervous tick I hadn't seen before. That was the trustee, Nolan said. Is it another hack? I asked. Did Sloan get in? No, Nolan said. The system is secure. Sloan is locked out, but the trustee has been conducting a deep dive audit of the entire file, not just Walter's history. Yours? Mine? I frowned. I don't have a history. I have a savings account with $2,000 and a student loan I'm almost done paying. It's not about your money, Nolan said. He put his glasses back on. It's about a gap in the timeline. The trustee found a discrepancy in the care logs you kept. I logged everything, I defended. Every pill, every meal. There is a week, Nolan said slowly. Last November, 7 days where the log is blank, no entries, no notes. And during that week, there was a withdrawal from Walter's personal checking account, a check written to cash, for $5,000. My stomach dropped. I remembered that week. I remembered it vividly. But it wasn't something I had written down because it was private. It was messy. I can explain that, I said, my voice sounding thin. You need to explain it to me right now, Nolan said, and his tone was no longer that of a partner, but of a lawyer assessing a damage control scenario. Because if Sloan's team finds that check, and they match it to the blank spot in your diary, they are going to construct a narrative that you stole from him. They will say you took a week off to spend his money. I didn't steal it, I said. He gave it to me. Can you prove it? Nolan asked. Is there a signed letter? A memo? No, I whispered. Then we have a problem, Nolan said. Because the trustee believes that Sterling's investigator is already pulling the bank images. They are going to stop attacking the trust and start attacking your credibility, and for $5,000 of unexplained cash, they can paint you as a thief. He gave it to me to fix a mistake, I said, tears stinging my eyes. A mistake my father made. Tell me, Nolan commanded. Everything, before they use it to hang you. There is a point in the file, the trustee had said on the phone, and now I knew what it was. It wasn't a digital footprint. It was a ghost from the past, and it was holding a check made out to cash. The hearing for the order to show cause took place 48 hours after the initial courtroom disaster. The atmosphere in Judge Holloway's courtroom had undergone a complete transformation. 2 days ago, it had felt like a battleground where two armies were clashing. Today, it felt like a principal's office where the unruly students were waiting to be expelled. I sat next to Nolan. My hands were folded on the table, resting on top of the spiral notebook that had become my shield. Across the aisle, the Harper family looked exhausted. Sloane's perfect blowout was starting to frizz at the ends, a tiny detail that betrayed her lack of sleep. My mother, Janine, was staring at the floor, refusing to look at me. My father, Victor, sat with his arms crossed, his leg bouncing with a nervous energy that shook the entire bench. But the real change was the man standing at the lectern. The man in the black suit, the trustee, had not just come to observe this time. He had come to dismantle them. State your full designation for the record, Judge Holloway said. Even the judge sounded different today. Less impatient, more lethal. I am Arthur Kincaid, the man said. His voice was a low rumble that filled the room without echoing. Director of Fiduciary Compliance and Risk Management for Ironwood Trust Services. Director of Compliance, the judge repeated. So you are not merely the administrator of the funds? No, Your Honor, Kincaid replied. My division is activated only when a trust is flagged for hostile interference. My role is not to distribute money. My role is to enforce the perimeter. Sloane shifted in her seat. The word perimeter seemed to hang in the air, cold and metallic. You filed a supplemental report regarding the conduct of the plaintiffs, the judge said, tapping a thick file on his desk. Specifically regarding the actions of Mr. Victor Harper. My father stopped bouncing his leg. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. That is correct, Kincaid said. He didn't turn to look at my father. He treated my family like data points, not people. Ironwood maintains a surveillance log of all external attempts to alter the estate plan during the final 6 months of the grantor's life. We call it the threat matrix. Sterling, the family lawyer, stood up halfway. Objection. The use of terms like threat matrix is prejudicial and theatrical. Overruled, the judge said without looking up. Continue. Mr. Kincaid. Kincaid opened his leather binder. On November 12th, 3 months before the death of Walter Hargrove, our system flagged an anomaly. A request was lodged with a mobile notary service in downtown Stonebrook. The request was for a rush codicil, an amendment to a will. I froze. A codicil? Grandpa never mentioned a codicil. The request did not come from Walter Hargrove, Kincaid continued. It was booked through a third-party legal service. Paid for with a credit card ending in 7112. Kincaid turned his head slowly, locking eyes with my father. That card is registered to Victor Harper. The room went deadly silent. My father's face drained of color, leaving him looking like a wax statue. The notary arrived at the residence, Kincaid said, reading from the report. He was met in the driveway by Mr. Victor Harper. The notary was instructed that the patient was too weak to read, but ready to sign. However, the notary, a man named Mr. Henderson, refused to proceed because the document attempted to transfer power of attorney specifically to Victor Harper, bypassing the existing executor. That is a lie, my father blurted out, standing up. I was just trying to help him pay his bills. He was confused. Sit down. Mr. Harper, the judge barked. Mr. Kincaid, do you have an affidavit from this notary? We do, Kincaid said, and we have the dash cam footage from the notary's vehicle, which recorded the interaction in the driveway, including the moment Mr. Harper offered the notary $500 cash to just get the signature and go. My mother gasped. She looked at my father with horror, not because he had done it, I realized, but because he had been caught. Attempted fraud, the judge muttered, writing something down, and subornation of a witness. We submit this as evidence of a long-standing conspiracy to circumvent the estate plan, Kincaid said. This was not a grieving family confused by a new trust. This was a coordinated effort to seize control that began long before the funeral. Judge Holloway closed the file. He took off his glasses and looked directly at Sterling. Mr. Sterling, the judge said softly. The softness was terrifying. Let us discuss the timeline of your filing. Sterling stood up. He looked like a man standing on the deck of a sinking ship. Your Honor, as I stated before. Stop, the judge cut him off. I have a delivery receipt here. It shows that Ironwood sent your office a digital and physical copy of the trust abstract, including the no contest clause, at 8:30 in the morning on the day of the initial hearing. You filed your emergency motion at 9:15. I hadn't opened the mail yet, Sterling stammered. It was a busy morning. You are a partner in a major law firm, the judge said. You have 3 clerks and a paralegal. You are telling me that you filed an emergency motion to seize a $10 million estate without checking your inbox for a document regarding that specific estate? It was an oversight, Sterling said, sweat visible on his brow. No, the judge said. It was a gamble. You knew the trust existed. You knew about the no contest clause. You filed the motion anyway, hoping that I would grant a temporary restraining order before the trustee could arrive. You hoped that possession would be 9/10 of the law. You tried to ambush this court. Your Honor, I resent that implication, and I resent being used as a tool for theft, the judge snapped. He slammed his hand on the bench. I am finding you in contempt, Mr. Sterling, and I am issuing a sanctions order. Sloane looked at her lawyer. What does that mean? She whispered loudly. It means, the judge said, answering her directly, that your lawyer is going to pay the legal fees for the other side. Every hour Mr. Kincaid has spent here. Every hour Mr. Pierce has spent. Your team is paying for it. Personally, Sterling slumped into his chair. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am granting the protective order requested by the trustee, effective immediately. Victor Harper, Janine Harper, and Sloan Harper are enjoined from contacting any bank, brokerage, or financial institution connected to the Walter Hargrove entity. You are forbidden from entering the property. You are forbidden from contacting the defendant, Avery Harper, except through counsel. You can't do that, Sloan cried out, standing up. He was my grandfather. That is my house, too. I grew up visiting there. You forfeited your right to that house when you tried to hack the bank account regarding it, the judge said cold. And regarding that little stunt with the password reset, Sloan went pale. I was just trying to see if the account was active. Mr. Kincaid, the judge said, does Ironwood wish to press criminal charges for the attempted unauthorized access? Kincaid paused. He looked at me. It was a calculated move. He was showing them that I held the power now. Not at this time, Kincaid said. However, we are keeping the log active. One more attempt, one single ping from a device linked to any of them, and we will file under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. You hear that? The judge said to Sloan. You are one click away from a federal indictment. I suggest you throw your phone in the river. Sloan sank back down. She looked small. She looked terrified. What are they going to do to me? She whispered to her mother. They are destroying us, Janine hissed back. But I am not done, Judge Holloway announced. The room, which had started to shift as people prepared to leave, froze again. In reviewing the documents submitted by Mr. Harper regarding the notary incident, the judge said, picking up a new piece of paper, and comparing them with the signatures on the original, will regarding the 2019 document, the court noticed a discrepancy. My father stopped breathing. I could see his chest lock up. The signature on the will submitted by the plaintiffs looks remarkably steady for a man who, according to medical records from that same week, was suffering from severe tremors due to a medication change. The judge said. He looked over his glasses at Victor. I am not a forensic handwriting expert, but this court has a duty to report suspicious filings. Therefore, I am referring the 2019 will to the district attorney's office for a forensic document examination. What? Sterling shot up. Your Honor, that is highly irregular. The will was notarized. By whom? The judge asked. Mr. Henderson? The same notary your client tried to bribe 5 months later? Sterling opened his mouth. But no words came out. He looked at Victor. Victor looked at the floor. If that will is found to be a forgery, the judge said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, then we are no longer talking about probate. We are talking about a felony Class B fraud. Do I make myself clear? Crystal, Kincaid said. We are adjourned, the judge said. He banged the gavel. The sound rang out like a gunshot. My mother looked at Sloan with a mixture of hatred and despair. You said the will was solid, she hissed. You said you handled it. I did, Sloan whispered frantically. Dad got it signed. Ask him. They turned to Victor, but Victor wasn't looking at them. He was staring at the empty space where his reputation used to be. Let's go, Nolan said, touching my elbow. Before they start screaming. We walked out of the courtroom, Kincaid flanking me on the other side. The hallway was crowded with people from the next session, but they parted for Kincaid like water around a shark. You didn't tell me about the notary, I said to Kincaid as we walked. Or the dash cam footage. Information is ammunition, Kincaid said simply. You don't fire all your rounds in the opening volley. You wait until the enemy exposes their flank. They are going to go to jail, I said. The reality of it was settling in. My father, if that will is fake. That is a choice he made, Kincaid said. Avery, you need to understand something. These people didn't just want the money. They wanted to erase you. If that will had been accepted, you would have been on the street. They would have evicted you from that house within 24 hours. They had the eviction notice drafted. We found it in their cloud files. I stopped walking. They were going to evict me? Yes, Kincaid said. On the day of the funeral, that was the plan. Any lingering guilt I felt for my father, any tiny shred of sympathy for my mother's tears, evaporated instantly. They weren't family, they were a demolition crew. We reached the main atrium. My parents and Sloane were coming out of the courtroom behind us. They were arguing. Sloane was crying now. Real. Ugly tears of fear. Janine was shouting something about, "How could you be so stupid?" Suddenly, a man in a cheap windbreaker stepped out from behind a pillar. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't court staff. He looked like a delivery driver. He walked straight up to Victor Harper. "Victor Harper?" the man asked. My father stopped. He looked at the man with disdain. "Get out of my way." "You are served," the man said. He shoved a thick, taped envelope into my father's chest. Victor instinctively grabbed it to keep it from falling. "What is this?" Victor demanded. "I already have a lawyer." "That isn't from the court," the man said, backing away. "That is from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Audit Division." Victor froze. The color that had drained from his face earlier didn't come back. It turned a sickly shade of gray. "HUD?" Sloane asked, wiping her eyes. "Dad, why is HUD serving you?" Victor looked at the return address on the envelope. His hands started to shake, violent tremors that rattled the paper. "The business loan," Nolan whispered to me. "The one he took out against the family business. He must have collateralized it with assets he didn't actually own yet. Assets he thought he would get from Walter." "He bet the farm," Kincaid said, watching with zero emotion. "And the farm just got seized by a trust." Victor looked up. He looked across the atrium and saw me standing there, flanked by the lawyer and the man in black. For a second, our eyes met. He didn't look like a father. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was actually a trapdoor. He didn't say a word. He just clutched the envelope to his chest and turned away. Walking fast, almost running, toward the exit. Sloane and Janine had to run to catch up with him, their heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. A chaotic, retreating rhythm of defeat. "Where is he going?" I asked. "To shred documents," Kincaid said. "But he is too late. We already have copies of everything." Kincaid turned to me. "Go home. Avery, the locks are changed. The security is live. You are safe." "Is it over now?" I asked. Kincaid adjusted his cuffs. "The legal war is over," he said. "But the scandal is just waking up. Tomorrow morning, everyone in Stonebrook is going to know that the Harper family is imploding. And when the truth comes out, they are going to try to blame you one last time." "Let them try," I said, and for the first time in my life, I actually meant it. "Good," Kincaid said, "because I have one more thing to show you. Something we found in the safe deposit box that wasn't money." "What is it?" "A key," Kincaid said, "and it doesn't fit any door in that house." The silence that followed the court victory was not peaceful. It was the heavy, static-charged silence of a retreating army laying landmines on their way out. I thought the judge's gavel had ended the war. But I was naive. The courtroom was just the theater of law. The streets of Stonebrook were the theater of reputation. And that was where Sloane Harper had decided to make her last stand. For 2 days, I stayed inside my grandfather's house, feeling less like an heiress and more like a squatter in my own life. I spent my time changing passcodes, shredding junk mail, and waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't drop. It rang. It was Tuesday morning, a little after 9 o'clock. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't have saved, but the area code was local. I assumed it was the locksmith, or perhaps the landscaping service Walter had used for 30 years. "Hello?" I answered, balancing a cup of coffee in one hand. "Avery? Is that you? It's Becca Vance, from the Junior League Committee." My stomach tightened. Becca Vance was not a friend. She was a social barometer. If Becca was calling you, it meant you were the topic of conversation at the country club, and she was fishing for a primary source quote to trade for social currency later. I hadn't spoken to her in 4 years. "Hi, Becca," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It has been a long time." "I know, right? Ages," she said, her voice dripping with a synthetic sweetness that made my teeth ache. "Listen, I am just calling because, well, I was worried about you. I heard some really disturbing things at brunch yesterday, and I just wanted to check in. You know how people talk. What are people saying, Becca? I asked. I walked over to the window and looked out at the driveway. A gray sedan was parked across the street. It had been there for an hour. Well, Becca lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Sloane was crying in the locker room. She was a mess. Avery, she told everyone that the police are investigating you. For God, I hate to even repeat it for locking your grandfather in a basement and forcing him to sign over the estate while he was medicated. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic case creaked. Sloane said that? She said there is a criminal file open, Becca continued, eager to spill the details. She said the only reason you aren't in jail yet is because you hired some high-powered fixer to bury the evidence. She was saying how scared she is for her parents. She said you threatened to ruin them if they tried to tell the truth. The narrative was breathtaking in its reversal. Sloane had taken every single thing she had done to me, the bullying, the legal threats, the manipulation, and simply swapped the names. She was projecting her own sins onto me to create a victimhood so compelling that no one would bother to check the court records. Becca, I said, my voice steady. My grandfather died in his bedroom. Holding my hand, the court has dismissed Sloane's claims. If she is saying otherwise, she is lying. Oh, I know, Becca said quickly, backing pedaling. I just thought you should know. People are saying the police are going to raid the house. I just wanted to warn you. I hung up without saying goodbye. My hand was shaking. It wasn't fear of the police. I knew the law was on my side. It was the realization that the truth didn't matter to people like Becca. The lie was more entertaining. I called Nolan immediately. She is scorching the earth, I told him as soon as he picked up. She is telling people I abused Walter. She is telling them I am under criminal investigation. We expected this, Nolan said. He sounded like he was in traffic, the hum of an engine in the background. It is the standard playbook for a narcissist who loses control. First, they attack the facts. When that fails, they attack the character. But it is ruining me, I said. I live in this town. Nolan, I can't go to the grocery store if people think I tortured an old man. Let them talk, Nolan said efficiently. Defamation is a tort. Avery, but it is expensive and slow to litigate. We are not going to sue her for slander yet. We are going to use her mouth to hang her. How? Ironwood has a clause, Nolan explained. The non-disparagement and interference protocol. By spreading false rumors that damage the integrity of the trust or its primary beneficiary, Sloane is technically interfering with the administration of the estate. Every lie she tells to a third party, if we can document it, becomes another strike against her in the final accounting. Becca Vance isn't going to testify, I said. She lives for gossip. I don't need Becca, Nolan said. I need digital footprints. Has Sloane posted anything? Sent any emails? Not that I know of. She will, Nolan predicted. She can't help herself. She needs validation. Keep your eyes open. And Avery, do not engage. If you scream back, you just look like two sisters fighting. If you stay silent, she looks like a crazy person screaming at a wall. I tried to take his advice. I tried to focus on work. I worked remotely for a boutique design firm called Redwood and Lark Consulting. It was a small, tight-knit group based in Seattle, and I had always kept my family drama completely separate from my professional life. My boss, Sarah, didn't even know my family had money. To her, I was just Avery, the reliable designer who always hit her deadlines. But the wall between my two lives crumbled at 2 o'clock that afternoon. I received an email from the HR director at Redwood and Lark. The subject line was simply, "Urgent inquiry." I clicked it open, my heart hammering against my ribs. Avery. We received a strange phone call today on the main line. A man identifying himself as a private investigator working on a financial fraud case asked to verify your employment dates. He also asked if we were aware of any pending litigation regarding theft involving you. We obviously did not answer and referred him to legal, but he was very aggressive. He insinuated that our company could be liable if we employed someone with a compromised background. Do you know what this is about? I stared at the screen. They weren't just gossiping at the country club. They were trying to get me fired. They were trying to cut off my income source so I would be forced to come to the table and negotiate. It was a siege tactic. Starve the enemy out. I forwarded the email to Nolan and Kincaid immediately. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It wasn't Nolan. It was the man in the black suit. Ms. Harper, Kincaid's voice was like granite. We received the forward. Do not reply to your HR director yet. Mr. Pierce is drafting a formal response from the trust to your employer, explaining that you are the victim of a harassment campaign and that any further inquiries should be directed to us. They called my job. Kincaid, I said, my voice cracking. They are trying to destroy my career. They are trying to find a pressure point, Kincaid corrected. They failed with the bank. They failed with the court. Now they are poking the soft spots. But they made a mistake. What mistake? They used a phone, Kincaid said. We traced the call to your employer. It came from a burner cell, but the geolocation pinged from a coffee shop in Georgetown, the same coffee shop where your sister's credit card was used 3 minutes prior to the call. So you can prove it was her? We can prove a correlation, Kincaid said. But more importantly, we can now classify this as tortious interference with business relations. It is no longer a family squabble. It is an attack on your livelihood. I am filing a motion for an emergency injunction this afternoon. If she or anyone connected to her contacts your employer again, they will be arrested for stalking. She won't stop, I said. She doesn't care about the law. She thinks she is above it. She is about to learn gravity, Kincaid said. Check your text messages. Avery, we just detected an outgoing message from her personal device directed to you. It cleared the network 4 seconds ago. I pulled the phone away from my ear. A new message notification was sitting there. It was from Sloan. Avery, please, this has gone too far. Mom is a wreck. Dad is staring at the wall. I just want fairness. Can we just meet for coffee? No lawyers, just sisters. I want to end this. It was pathetic. It was pleading. It was the text of a woman who realized she had lost. But then, before I could even process it, a second text bubbled up. You think you're smart hiding behind those suits? But you don't know what I can do. I have stories about you, Avery, stories from college, stories about that summer in Verify. Do you really want me to start talking to the press? Call me, now. The duality was chilling. The first text was for the record, something she could show her parents or a judge to say. Look, I tried to make peace. The second text was the real Sloan, the blackmailer. She just threatened me, I told Kincaid. She said she has stories. Forward the screenshots, Kincaid commanded. Do not reply. She wants a meeting, I said. She wants to negotiate. She doesn't want to negotiate, Kincaid said. She wants to infect you. She wants to get in a room with you so she can record you, or provoke you, or manipulate you into signing something. You are not going. I know, I said. But why is she so desperate? She has her own money. She has a husband who runs a hedge fund. Why is she risking jail for Grandpa's estate? It doesn't make sense. It's greed. Sure, but this feels frantic. There was a pause on the line. A long, heavy silence. Mr. Pierce and I were debating when to show you the next piece of evidence, Kincaid said slowly. We thought it might be too much for 1 week, but given her escalation, you need to know the battlefield. What did you find? When we took control of the house, Kincaid said, we secured Walter's personal office. We drilled the floor safe. Inside, there was the usual: deeds, bonds, gold coins, but there was also a manila folder taped to the underside of the shelf. Walter had hidden it. What was in it? A due diligence report, Kincaid said. Walter didn't just trust his gut. He hired a private investigator a year ago. He wanted to know why Sloan had suddenly started visiting him after years of silence. I held my breath. And? The report is comprehensive, Kincaid said. It details the financial health of Sloane and her husband, Greg. On the surface, they are the golden couple of D.C. society, big house, charity galas, luxury cars. Right, I said. They are loaded. They are insolvent, Kincaid said. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. What? They are broke, Avery, Kincaid said, his voice devoid of pity. Actually, worse than broke. They are underwater. Greg's hedge fund took a massive position in a tech derivative that imploded 18 months ago. They covered the losses with personal loans. Then they leveraged the Georgetown house. Then they maxed out the credit lines. I sank onto the sofa. But the clothes, the vacations, the car. Leased, rented, put on cards that are currently 90 days past due, Kincaid recited. It is a house of cards. They are floating on a sea of debt, keeping up appearances while the water rises. They needed Walter's estate not to get richer, but to keep from drowning. They have a balloon payment due on a private loan next Tuesday. $400,000. Next Tuesday, I whispered. That's why she filed the emergency motion. She needed the cash by Tuesday. Exactly, Kincaid said. And the stories she is threatening you with? The career sabotage? It is panic. She is a cornered animal. If she doesn't get a payout from this estate, she loses everything. Her house, her status, her reputation. She will be a pariah. The realization washed over me. Sloane wasn't a powerful villain. She was a desperate, drowning woman trying to climb on top of me to keep her head above water. Does my father know? I asked. Does Victor know she is broke? We don't think so, Kincaid said. The investigator's notes suggest she has been lying to them too, borrowing money from your parents to invest in Greg's fund, but actually using it to pay off the interest on other loans. She has been cannibalizing the family for a year. I looked at the text message again. You don't know what I can do. It wasn't a threat of power. It was a scream of terror. So what happens when Tuesday comes? I asked. The balloon payment defaults, Kincaid said. The creditors move in. The facade collapses, and she knows it. That is why she wants me to settle, I said. She needs me to write her a check to save her life. And if you do, Kincaid said, his voice hard, you are throwing money into a black hole. It won't save her. It will just delay the inevitable for a month. Walter knew this. That is why he locked the money up. He wrote a note on the front of the file. Do not give them water. They have forgotten how to swim. I closed my eyes. I pictured Grandpa sitting in his study, reading this report, realizing that his golden granddaughter was a fraud. It must have broken his heart. And then he had made a plan to make sure I didn't go down with the ship. Kincaid, I said, release the hounds. Clarify, Kincaid said. Send the injunction to my job, I said, my voice gaining strength. Send the cease and desist to her phone, and file the motion for the tortious interference. I am not going to be her life raft. Understood, Kincaid said. I am dispatching the courier now. And one more thing, I said. Yes? If she shows up at the house, I said, if she tries to come here to beg, we have armed security parked 2 blocks away, Kincaid said. They are on a 30-second response time. You will not have to face her alone. I hung up the phone. The house felt different now. It wasn't a fortress protecting a fortune. It was a shelter protecting me from a collapsing building. I looked at Sloane's text one last time. You don't know what I can do. I typed a reply. My fingers were steady. I know about the balloon payment. Sloane, I know about the debt. Do not contact me again. I hit send. Then I blocked the number. The silence returned to the house. But this time, it wasn't static. It was the calm of a decision made. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance anymore. I was fighting to survive the blast radius of my sister's self-destruction. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room floor, my phone lit up again. Not a text, an email notification. It wasn't from Sloane. It was from an automated alert system I had set up years ago on a whim. Zillow alert. 442 Oakhaven Lane. Status change. Foreclosure pending. 442 Oakhaven Lane. My parents' house. I stared at the screen. Sloane hadn't just leveraged her own life. She had convinced my father to leverage his too. She had taken them all down. The war wasn't over. The massacre had just begun. The Zillow alert regarding my parents' house was still burning a hole in my mind when I arrived back at the secure conference room the next morning. The city skyline was gray and overcast, matching the mood inside the glass walls. The table was no longer covered with access logs and hacking attempts. Now, it was covered with financial schematics. Nolan Pierce looked like he hadn't slept, though his suit was pressed with military precision. Arthur Kincaid, the man in the black suit, was standing by the window, looking down at the traffic like a gargoyle guarding a cathedral. "Sit down, Avery," Nolan said, gesturing to the chair. "We have reached the bottom of the rabbit hole." "I saw the foreclosure notice," I said, placing my coffee on a coaster. "My parents are losing their house. Sloane dragged them down with her." "It is worse than a foreclosure," Kincaid said, turning from the window. "A foreclosure is a tragedy. This is a Ponzi scheme." He walked over to the table and placed a single, thick document in front of me. It wasn't a court filing. It was a piece of personal stationery, heavy and cream-colored, covered in my grandfather's distinct, spidery handwriting. "What is this?" I asked. "This is the letter of intent," Kincaid explained. "Walter wrote this the day he funded the trust. It is not a legal instrument in the strict sense, but it serves as the spirit of the document. It guides the trustee's discretion. We usually keep this private, but given the acceleration of your sister's collapse, you need to see it." I opened the letter. "To my trustee," the letter began. "I am not creating this trust to withhold money from my family. I am creating it to prevent a crime." I looked up at Kincaid. "A crime?" "Read the second paragraph," Nolan urged. "My granddaughter, Sloane, believes that wealth is a renewable resource. She has forgotten that money is finite. Over the last year, I have discovered that she has been trading on my name. She has not just spent her own money, she has promised mine to people who do not have a sense of humor about unpaid debts." "Trading on his name," I whispered. "What does that mean?" "It means," Nolan said, tapping a diagram on his laptop screen, "that the asset Sloane is fighting for isn't the cash in the checking account. She doesn't care about the furniture or the jewelry. She wants the shares." "Shares?" "The Hargrove Limited Partnership," Nolan said. "Your grandfather owned a 30% stake in a commercial real estate syndicate. It pays dividends, sure, but the real value is the equity. It is worth roughly $4 million. "I didn't even know he still owned that," I admitted. "Sloane knew," Kincaid said, "and more importantly, her lenders knew." Nolan spun the laptop around. "We pulled the UCC filings. Those are public records of liens against personal property. 6 months ago, Sloane took out a hard money loan from a private equity group in New York. A bridge loan, high interest, short term." "How much?" I asked. $800,000, Nolan said. "And here's the catch," Kincaid added. "She didn't have collateral for a loan that size. Her house was already maxed out, so she offered them a future interest. She showed them a copy of the old 2019 will, the one she thought was still valid, and she signed a promissory note guaranteeing that she would transfer the Hargrove Limited Partnership shares to the lenders within 30 days of Walter's death." I felt the blood drain from my face. "She sold Grandpa's property before he was even dead?" "She sold it," Kincaid confirmed. "And she spent the cash, probably to cover the margin calls on her husband's hedge fund disaster. But now, the clock has run out. Walter died. The lenders are calling. They want their shares, but she can't give them the shares because the trust owns them." "And the trust," Nolan said, pointing to a specific clause in the trust document, "has a restriction on alienation." He read the clause aloud. "No beneficiary shall have the right to anticipate, sell, assign, mortgage, pledge, or otherwise dispose of their interest in the trust estate prior to actual distribution. Any attempt to do so shall be void ab initio. Void ab initio, I repeated. Void from the beginning. Exactly, Nolan said. Sloane committed fraud. She pledged an asset she didn't own and couldn't legally transfer. She took $800,000 from dangerous men based on a lie. That is why she filed the emergency motion in probate court. She needed a judge to override the trust and hand her the title immediately, so she could flip it to the lenders before they realized they had been duped. It all clicked into place. The urgency, the hysteria, the "we need to protect the assets" speech Sterling had given. They weren't trying to protect the assets for the family. They were trying to grab the steering wheel of a car that had already been sold for scrap. "She is trapped," I said softly. "If she doesn't get the shares by next week." "The lenders default the loan," Kincaid said. "They sue her. They expose the fraud. She goes to prison for obtaining funds under false pretenses, and her husband goes down with her." "And my parents?" I asked. "Collateral damage," Nolan said. "Victor co-signed a guarantee on a smaller loan to help her make an interest payment 2 months ago. That is why HUD is auditing him. He leveraged his business against a debt that is toxic." I looked back at Grandpa's letter. "I am creating it to prevent a crime." He knew. He knew she would try this. "There is more," Kincaid said. "Look at the final instruction in the letter of intent." I read the bottom of the page. "If any beneficiary challenges this trust or attempts to seize control through litigation, the trustee is instructed to immediately suspend all discretionary distributions to that beneficiary. Furthermore, the trustee shall escrow that beneficiary's share and report the details of the conflict to the court." "The freeze provision," Kincaid said. Walter built in a failsafe. He knew Sloane would sue, and he knew that if she sued, she'd need money to pay lawyers, so he wrote a rule. If you sue, the tap runs dry immediately. She locked herself out, I realized. By filing that motion on Tuesday, she triggered the suspension, even if there were cash available to help her. Kincaid can't give it to her now. Legally, his hands are tied. "She hit the self-destruct button and didn't even look up," Nolan said grimly. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Sloane was probably screaming at Sterling, or crying to my mother, or lying to her husband. She was a drowning woman flailing in the water, dragging everyone down with her. "She did this to herself," I said, trying to harden my heart. "But she is going to destroy everything on her way down." "We have a choice," Nolan said behind me. "The hearing for the sanctions is coming up. We can just let the system work. We can file a standard motion. Let the judge see the trust documents. And let the foreclosure happen. It is clean. It is passive." I turned around. Or, Kincaid said, his eyes gleaming with a dark intensity. "We can be active. We can submit the letter of intent. We can submit the UCC findings. We can show Judge Holloway exactly why the emergency motion was filed. If we do that," I said, "it becomes public record. The lenders will see it. The district attorney will see it. It will nuke her," Nolan admitted. "It won't just be a civil loss. It will be a criminal referral. But it will also end the harassment instantly. When the truth comes out that she is a fraud, no one will listen to her stories about you. The narrative flips from Avery the abuser to Sloane the con artist." I looked at the spiral notebook on the table, the one Grandpa had told me to keep, blogging the truth. He didn't want secrets. He wanted order. He wanted the ledger to balance. If I stayed silent, I was protecting a lie. I was helping Sloane maintain the illusion that she was a victim, and that illusion was hurting me. It was hurting my reputation. It was hurting the truth of who Walter Hargrove was. "Grandpa didn't hide this letter in a safe deposit box," I said slowly. "He left it with the trustee. He wanted it to be used." "He wanted you to be the one to decide," Kincaid corrected. "He gave me the gun, Avery, but you have to pull the trigger." I thought about the text message. "You don't know what I can do." I thought about the call to my HR director, the attempt to get me fired. the willingness to starve me out. Sloane had made her choice. She had chosen money over family every single time. She had chosen image over integrity. And now, she was demanding that I pay the price for her ambition. "Do it," I said. Nolan paused, his hand hovering over the keyboard. "You are sure? Once we file this brief, there is no going back. You are handing your sister to the wolves." "I am not handing her to the wolves," I said, my voice steady. "I am just turning on the light so everyone can see that she is the wolf." "Very well," Kincaid said. "Mr. Pierce, draft the response to order to show cause. Attach the letter of intent as Exhibit D. Attach the UCC lien search as Exhibit E. And frame the argument around bad faith filing motivated by undisclosed insolvency." "Undisclosed insolvency," Nolan repeated, typing the words. "That is a polite way of saying she tried to use the court to launder a bad debt." "It gets the point across," Kincaid said. Nolan worked for the next hour, the silence in the room broken only by the clatter of keys. I watched the document take shape on the screen. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It stripped away the emotional drama and left only the cold, hard math. Sloane owed $1.2 million. The estate was her only exit. She had lied to get it. When Nolan finished, he hit print. He slid the signature page across to Kincaid. Kincaid signed it with a fountain pen. His signature was sharp, angular, aggressive. "This goes to the clerk within the hour," Kincaid said. "Sterling will get a copy by courier at noon. I imagine he will resign from the case by 1 o'clock. "Why?" I asked. "Because lawyers are rats," Nolan said, closing his laptop. "And this document proves his client used him to commit fraud on the court. He won't risk his license for her. He will drop her like a hot stone." "So she will be alone," I said. "She will have her parents," Kincaid said, "until they read this and realize she stole their retirement to pay for her mistakes." It was a heavy thought, the total disintegration of the Harper family, but as I looked at Kincaid, I realized there was one loose end we hadn't pulled yet. "Kincaid," I said, "you said there was a discrepancy with the signature on the old will, and you mentioned the night the notary came, but we still don't know who actually signed the 2019 will. Do we? If Grandpa didn't—" Kincaid stopped packing his briefcase. He looked at me, and his face was unreadable. "We have a theory," he said. "My father?" I guessed. "He has the same last name. He could have forged it." "Victor is clumsy," Kincaid said. "He is a blunt instrument. The signature on the 2019 will was good. It was practiced. It had the right slant, the right pressure. It tricked the bank for 3 years. Then who? Someone who spent hours watching Walter sign checks," Kincaid said. "Someone who sat across from him at the kitchen table. Someone who studied his hand movements." He looked at the letter of intent one last time before sliding it into his bag. "We are submitting a request for the original document to be tested for indentations," Kincaid said. "When you write on a piece of paper, you leave ghost marks on the pages underneath. We believe that if we analyze the notebook that Sloane used for her notes during those visits, we might find practice signatures pressed into the paper." "Sloane?" I whispered. "She forged it herself?" "We will know at the final hearing," Kincaid said. "But there is one more thing. Avery, something that happened the night Walter died. Something that wasn't in the medical report." "What?" "The night nurse," Kincaid said. "The one Sloane insisted on hiring for the weekends? The one we fired after the funeral?" "Yes, Brenda. We tracked her down," Kincaid said. "She didn't want to talk, but when we mentioned the federal investigation into the fraud, she suddenly remembered something." "What did she remember?" "She remembered that 2 hours before Walter died," Kincaid said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Someone came to the house. They didn't come in the front door. They came in the back, and they weren't there to say goodbye." "Who was it?" I demanded. Kincaid buttoned his jacket. He walked to the door and held it open for me. "The nurse said she heard arguing," Kincaid said. "She heard Walter say, 'I will not sign it,' and then she heard the sound of glass breaking. When she went in, the visitor was gone, and Walter was gasping for air. I felt a cold hand grip my heart. They killed him? They stressed him into a heart attack? We can't prove murder, Kincaid said. But at the next hearing, I am going to ask Sloane Harper exactly where she was at 9 p.m. on the night of February 14th, and if her phone location puts her in that backyard. He let the sentence hang in the air. Then she isn't just broke, Nolan finished. She is a monster. Let's go to court, Kincaid said. It is time to finish this. The final hearing at the Stonebrook County Probate Court did not feel like a battle. It felt like an autopsy. The energy that had fueled the previous sessions, the anger, the shouting, the frantic accusations from my sister, had completely evaporated. In its place was a heavy, suffocating silence. The courtroom was packed, but it was the kind of quiet you find in a hospital waiting room when the doctor comes out with a grim expression. I sat at the defense table next to Nolan Pierce. On my other side sat Arthur Kincaid, the man in the black suit, who was arranging his documents with the precision of a mortician preparing instruments. Across the aisle, the Harper family looked like a painting that had been left out in the rain. Sloane's posture was slumped, her camel coat looking wrinkled and tired. My father, Victor, was staring at a spot on the floor, his face the color of old ash. My mother, Janine, was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Looking at Sloane with a mixture of fear and resentment, Judge Holloway entered the room. He didn't bang his gavel. He simply sat down, opened the file, and looked over his reading glasses at the assembly. We are here to conclude the matter of the Walter Hargrove estate, the judge said. His voice was calm, devoid of the irritation he had shown earlier, and to address the order to show cause regarding the conduct of the plaintiff's counsel. Sterling, Sloane's lawyer, stood up. He looked smaller today. He didn't button his jacket. Your Honor, Sterling began, his voice raspy. Regarding the order, my firm has reviewed the timeline provided by the trustee. And, the judge prompted, and we concede, Sterling said, looking down at his table. We acknowledge that the trust disclosure package was received by our office prior to the filing of the emergency motion. It was a failure of internal communication. We withdraw all challenges to the trust's validity. It was not a failure of communication. Mr. Sterling, the judge corrected him sharply. It was a gamble. You bet that you could seize the assets before the paperwork caught up to you. You lost. And now, we discuss the cost of that bet. The judge turned to Kincaid. Mr. Trustee, what is the status of the beneficiaries? Kincaid stood up. He didn't need notes. He knew the destruction of my sister's life by heart. Your Honor, regarding the primary beneficiary, Avery Harper, the trust finds her in full compliance. However, regarding the secondary beneficiary, Sloane Harper, and the contingent beneficiaries, Victor and Janine Harper, Ironwood is invoking Article 9. Sloane's head snapped up. Article 9? What is that? The no contest clause, Kincaid said, his voice filling the room like cement pouring into a foundation. The clause states that any beneficiary who challenges the validity of the trust, or who attempts to interfere with the administration of the assets, forfeits their entire share. The filing of the emergency motion on Tuesday was a direct challenge, but we also have a secondary cause for disinheritance. Kincaid held up a single sheet of paper. It was the log of the hacking attempt. On Tuesday at 11:45 in the morning, a device registered to Sloane Harper attempted to illegally access the trust's secure portal and alter the routing instructions for the cash distribution. Kincaid stated, This is not litigation. This is attempted theft. The judge nodded. He looked at Sloane. Ms. Harper, the judge said, the court has reviewed the digital forensics. You tried to break into the bank account 3 minutes after I told you to stand down. That action alone is sufficient to trigger the disinheritance. I needed the money, Sloane cried out. It was a raw, unvarnished admission. I have a loan due. They are going to take my house. Grandpa promised me that money. Your grandfather promised you support, the judge said. He did not promise you a bailout for fraud. By trying to steal the money, you have proven exactly why he locked it away." The judge picked up his pen and signed the order in front of him. The scratching sound was amplified by the microphone. "The court confirms the activation of the no contest clause," the judge ruled. "Sloane Harper is hereby removed as a beneficiary of the Walter Hargrove Trust. She is treated as if she predeceased the grantor. Her share is revoked and returned to the general fund." Sloane let out a sob that sounded like a physical injury. She slumped forward, putting her head in her hands. $4 million. Gone. The lifeline she had promised her lenders, severed, but the judge wasn't done. "Furthermore," Holloway continued, "I am granting the trustee's request for a permanent protective order. Victor Harper and Janine Harper are permanently enjoined from contacting any financial institution connected to this estate. Any attempt to contact Avery Harper regarding financial matters will be considered a violation of this order and will result in immediate arrest." My father looked up, his eyes hollow. "I am his son," he whispered. "You can't cut me off." "Mr. Harper," the judge said, leaning forward, "you should be grateful that being cut off is the only thing happening to you today, because I have reviewed the video footage from the mobile notary incident." Victor froze. "I have forwarded that footage, along with the questioned signature on the 2019 will, to the district attorney's office," the judge said. "They are very interested in how a man with severe tremors managed to sign his name perfectly, and why you were seen offering cash to a notary to ignore protocol." My mother grabbed Victor's arm. "Victor? What does he mean?" Victor pulled away from her. He couldn't look at her. He knew that the moment they walked out of those doors, he wasn't going home to a quiet dinner. He was going home to a criminal investigation and a foreclosure notice from the audit. Sloane suddenly stood up. She wiped her face, her makeup smeared, her eyes wild with a last desperate burst of entitlement. "This is her fault," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Avery did this. She poisoned him. She turned him against us. She is the one who destroyed this family." The courtroom gasped. Sterling tried to pull her down, but she shoved him away. "It's not fair," Sloane yelled. "I was the favorite. I was the successful one. She is just a failure. She doesn't deserve it." Judge Holloway slammed his gavel down. Bang. "Enough," the judge roared. The room fell silent instantly. "Ms. Harper," the judge said, his voice trembling with controlled anger, "you are laboring under a delusion. You think this court, or your sister, or the trustee has done this to you. You are wrong." The judge held up the thick file, the letters, the logs, the evidence Grandpa had compiled. "The person who destroyed your illusion of control," the judge said, "was Walter Hargrove. He saw you. He saw who you really were. He saw that you looked at him and saw a checkbook. He saw that your sister looked at him and saw a human being." The judge looked at me. "The court finds that Avery Harper is the sole remaining beneficiary of the trust. The assets are hers to distribute according to the grantor's wishes. Case closed." He banged the gavel one last time. Sloane collapsed back into her chair. She looked around the room, waiting for someone to save her, but Sterling was packing his bag, eager to escape. Her parents were staring at the floor, paralyzed by their own looming legal nightmares. She was completely alone. Kincaid touched my shoulder. "It is done. Let's go." We walked out of the courtroom, past the gallery, past the bailiff. I didn't look at Sloane. I didn't look at my parents. I walked out into the hallway, where the sunlight was streaming through the high windows. "So that is it?" I asked Nolan. "I own everything?" "You own the house, the portfolio, and the partnership shares," Nolan said. "And because the partnership shares are now yours. Sloane's lenders have no claim. They will default her loan by close of business today." "She is going to lose her house," I said. "She lost her house 6 months ago," Kincaid corrected. "She just didn't know it yet. You merely signed the eviction notice." Kincaid placed his briefcase on a bench and opened it. He pulled out the final folder, the one Grandpa had marked distribution instructions. There is one last thing, Kincaid said. Walter gave you full discretion. You can keep every penny. You can sell the house and move to Paris. But he left a suggestion, a final wish, if you felt generous. I looked at the paper. It was a brochure for a local community initiative, the Stonebrook Youth Garden and Art Center. It was a project that had stalled years ago due to lack of funding. He wanted to build this, I said, remembering. He used to walk past that empty lot and say it was a shame that kids in the city didn't know how to grow a tomato. He never built it because your father told him it was a waste of capital, Kincaid said. He told Walter that the family money should remain in the family. I looked at the balance sheet. $10 million. It was more money than I could ever spend. And right now, holding it felt heavy. I didn't want the money to be a weapon anymore. I wanted it to be a seed. Nolan, I said, do we have check writing authority yet? As of 2 minutes ago, Nolan said. The freeze is lifted. Write a check, I said, to the Stonebrook Youth Garden. How much? Nolan asked, taking out his pen. I looked at the courtroom doors, where Sloane was likely still sitting, mourning the loss of a fortune she never earned. $500,000, I said. In memory of Walter Hargrove. Nolan smiled. It was the first time I had seen him genuinely smile. That is exactly the amount of the bribe your father offered the notary. I like the symmetry. Make it happen, I said. Just then, the courtroom doors opened. Sloane walked out. She wasn't striding like she had on the first day. Her head was down. She was walking fast, clutching her purse to her chest. She saw me standing there with Kincaid and Nolan. She stopped, for a second. I thought she was going to scream again. I thought she was going to threaten me with the press, or her stories, or her rage. But she didn't. She looked at Kincaid, the man who had systematically dismantled her life. She looked at Nolan, who had outmaneuvered her lawyer, and then she looked at me. She saw the folder in my hand. She saw the calm in my eyes, and she realized that her quiet luxury act, the clothes, the attitude, the entitlement, was useless against the truth. The court hadn't been bullied by her style. It had been ruled by her grandfather's receipts. You won, she whispered. Her voice was raspy, broken. I hope you're happy. I am not happy. Sloane, I said quietly. I am just safe. And finally, so is Grandpa. She stared at me for another second, a flicker of something like regret crossing her face. Or maybe it was just fear of the phone call she had to make to her husband. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on the marble, a lonely, hollow sound fading into the distance. My parents followed a moment later. My father saw me and started to step toward me, perhaps to beg, perhaps to scold. Kincaid simply stepped in front of me, crossing his arms. My father stopped. He looked at the black suit, then turned and hurried after Sloane, a man running from his own shadow. I took a deep breath. The air in the hallway smelled of floor wax and coffee, just like it had on the first day. But it didn't smell like fear anymore. It smelled like freedom. What now? Nolan asked, closing the file. Now, I said, clutching Grandpa's spiral notebook to my chest. I go home. I have a garden to water. I looked back at the closed doors of the courtroom one last time. I realized that Grandpa had taught me the most important lesson of all. Not in the garden, but from the grave, when people try to erase you with a story. Don't scream, don't fight, and don't play their game. Just put the evidence on the table, stand straight, and let the law do the rest. Truth doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be documented. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Lily Revenge Stories. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving to work in London, cooking dinner in Texas, or relaxing in Sydney? Let me know in the comments below so we can share our thoughts together. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to see justice served.